Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 27, recorded September 2019. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan and we learn their fandom story. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 27. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Show notes for this and every episode are posted at trekprofiles.com, where I post all the links and more information about each episode and more info about our guests. If you like what you hear on our podcast and you want to support us, please do make sure that you subscribe to the show via your preferred podcasting platform. Also, feel free to share the show with all of your Star Trek friends. It's fun. You should try it. Warning, people. As we record this, we are at the end of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point may be discussed on this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my co-host is the absolutely autonomous, astoundingly awesome, yet always aloof M5 Multitronic Unit. Say hello, M5.
The M5 stands by.
Show me the housekeeping, news, weather, and announcements.
Working.
Okay, people, there are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of the episode. Somehow I spontaneously decided to do a show and tell with some random Star Trek loot that I had sitting on my desk at the time. So if you want to see some of the pictures of stuff that I was talking about, I posted them on the show notes page at trekprofiles.com. So check that out if you have an interest. I think some tribbles got into the audio system because there was a weird audio glitch that appeared from time to time in this recording. I wasn't able to quite fix all of it, so many apologies for that, but I think it still came out pretty good. All right, let's take a look at some listener feedback. I have an email here from listener Amina from Deep Space Station K500. Wow, that's a lot of Deep Space Stations. She says, quote, I love your podcast, and my favorite part is hearing about other fans' favorite episodes, but I don't think it's a good idea to pick unofficial things like novels or fanfic for the show. They aren't official Star Trek, unquote. And she goes on for some length about that. So, first of all, thank you for your email, Amina. Now, the guests choose what they want to talk about, and it doesn't bother me too much if people want to pick other things besides the, heaven help me, quote-unquote, canonical Star Trek. I think that that's part of the beauty of the fandom, but I thank you for your feedback, and I thank you for listening. Alrighty then, let's talk about some Kobayashi Maru feedback. These are from episode 25 with Jennifer Tift. Question 1. Time for a coffee in the Voyager's mess. There are only 2 blends on offer, Landris or the Tom Paris Delight. Jen picked Tom, but all of you selected Landris by 62 to 38%. Question 2. Welcome Starfleet Cadet. Choose your first assignment, Starbase Yorktown or Deep Space Station K7. Both Jen and the listeners picked Starbase Yorktown by 68 to 32%. Let's do question 3. Select your next elective at Starfleet Academy. Learn starship piloting from Sulu or warp theory from Scotty. Jen was solidly behind Scotty, and so was I, to be perfectly honest. But all of you wanted that helm seat, and so you picked Sulu by 51 to 49%. A narrow victory for the helmsman over the engineer. Question 4. Which would be worse, captured by the Orion Syndicate or being a prisoner of the Packlids? Jen picked the Packlids, but Twitter people picked the Orions by 54 to 46%. The Packlids were not strong. They did most certainly not go. Question 5. Would you rather meet the Chandra from Move Along Home or Dr. Severin from The Way to Eden? And finally, both my guest and all of you Herberts out there picked the Chandra by 77 to 23%. As always, after each episode is released, I post the questions on Twitter, so follow me there at Trek Profiles, and you can have your say on this episode's questions. That is enough of that, M5. Let's do the show.
M5 will comply.
His favorite character is Dr. McCoy. His favorite baddies are the Cardassians. He loves that plain and simple Taylor Garrick, though. And his favorite Enterprise is the 1701 refit, no bloody A, B, C, or D, which he made very clear to me in his email from Washington, D.C. on Earth in Sector 001. It's Carl Wonders. Welcome, Carl. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure to get you on, Carl. We've been talking back and forth through Twitter for a long time, so it's nice to finally rope you in and get you on the show.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to it for some time now, so dig into it.
All right. Well, the M5 is furiously telling me that I have neglected to ask question one. So question one, Carl, are you a Star Trek fan?
I'm absolutely a Star Trek fan.
When did you realize you were a Star Trek fan?
Well, it's kind of funny. It's been a hot and cold kind of fandom, I would say, for me. It started when I was young. My mother was a big fan of the original series when it aired originally. And so then she introduced me to Star Trek when I was about 5 years old, I'd say. And I was lucky enough to be of the age where I grew up watching The Next Generation in its initial run. I was 7, I believe, when it started. I was 8 years old when TNG debuted. So I got to watch that pretty much live as it happened. And then got into Deep Space Nine. Like many people, it didn't quite grab me the first time through, but I stuck with it. And
Star Trek in general, or Deep Space Nine in particular?
Oh, Deep Space Nine. It's one of those shows that I think has improved with age. For whatever reason, it didn't have the sell factor to the fandom that TNG did. For whatever reason, people were just comparing it to TNG, I think. And it was such a different concept and a different show and a different set of characters that maybe some people just didn't gravitate towards it. But because I remember thinking when Voyager debuted that I was like, oh, this is more like what I wanted, but then, as life tends to do, I went off to college and didn't really have access to television as much because that back in the day, there was no streaming. It was all, television based appointment television where you had to sit there and be there for the show when it aired or you missed it.
That's right.
So I kind of fell off midway through season 3 of Voyager and only recently have addressed that. So, and then I got back into it a little bit. I tried to get into it with Enterprise. For whatever reason, Enterprise didn't really grab me. And then when the films kind of petered out with Nemesis, there was that, dark days of Star Trek fandom that we lived through. With the J.J. Abrams film, that really kind of rekindled my interest in Star Trek. I went off to graduate school in New York City, moved there not knowing anybody in the city. And it's actually, people have written about this where it's a rather the most lonely experience you can have is when you're in a big place like a big city and you don't know anybody there. And so I was there in my apartment. I was doing my experiments and things for graduate school. And then I'd go home to an empty apartment. And this was in the days when this little upstart company called Netflix would send you DVDs in the mail in a little red envelope. And I remembered that I hadn't finished Deep Space Nine. So I did my first rewatch of a Star Trek show by getting the mail order DVDs of Deep Space Nine and slowly making my way through them in the evenings when I get home from doing whatever I was doing in graduate school. So that really kind of carried me through some lonely periods of time when I was, off in school, not really getting to know that many people and spending more time with my lab bench than I was with friends. So, Star Trek helped me through that a little bit and that's really what kind of relaunched my fandom, so to speak.
It's strange that you bring this up about New York City because I was born and raised there. And now I, of course, live in Las Vegas. And when I go back, which I often do for work, it's a very weird experience. It's like pulling an old coat out of your closet from long ago and just putting it on. And it doesn't quite have the same kind of feeling to it that it did back in the day. It doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels alien yet familiar at the same time. And I think I know what you're saying about feeling alone in a giant city, right?
Yeah.
And you got 9 million people around you, and you feel like you're just about on a deserted island, right? It's very strange.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit like that.
But Deep Space Nine became your companion.
A little bit, yeah. I would say it was kind of something to look forward to coming home to. I didn't have pets or anything like that. I wasn't allowed, so it was sort of what I had waiting for me to come home to when I finally did come home. Sometimes late in the evening or at night.
And so you finished out Deep Space Nine on Netflix, but did you ever go back to Voyager?
I didn't. And I'm not quite sure why, other than maybe just not having the best memories of that show or for whatever reason. I don't think it was really fair of me to think of it that way, but watching other shows around that time too. But I never really went back to Voyager up until last year. I was, again, something similar with me happened similar to the New York experience, where I found myself rather unexpectedly having to relocate again to back here to Washington, D.C., where I am now. And it was another example of basically starting over. I had personal things that happened in my life, and I had to basically restart a lot of things over again. And this was a time when social media existed, and I was able to find myself talking to like-minded folks like yourself on Twitter and other places. And that kind of pulled me back into the fandom a second time. I'd been off of it a little bit for, various reasons, but mostly that there just wasn't a lot of content out there. And when I was watching TV, it wasn't a time to watch Star Trek. It was other shows were taking priority. I also wasn't the only one in charge of the remote at the time. So that had something to do with it too, I would say. So finding a group of people to kind of commune with and getting interested in doing things like going to STLV for the first time and just basically getting back into Star Trek. And then that's really how I found out that Star Trek Discovery was even a thing, was through talking to people and getting to know the fans and things like that. So I had been out of the loop to the point where I didn't even know there was a new show coming up until, maybe 6 months or less than that before it actually aired.
It's surprising to me the number of people outside of Star Trek Twitter and sort of, in the convention scene and all of that I'll be at work or something and run into people that'll say, oh, yeah, I'm a complete Star Trek fan. I'm like, oh, are you watching the new show? And they're like, what new show? What's
Yeah.
that? Tell me about it. I had no idea. And I think, what is happening? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's very, very strange to me. But there's a lot of those people out there. And it's really interesting that they're having this completely different experience of Star Trek. But it seems like for you that Star Trek is something that you seem to go to when you're having a sort of a down point in your life, maybe.
I don't know if I consciously made that decision to do it, but it just seemed to be, something old and familiar to fall back on. And even if it was a show I hadn't seen or episodes I hadn't seen, it was still that property or that story that I was very familiar with, and that like I said, I grew up watching. And just it was kind of like, to carry the clothes analogy, it was like finding those pair of jeans that you've worn in really well and they fit well and you just feel comfortable wearing them. It was the same thing. So if I found myself in a uncomfortable situation or just kind of not quite sure what to do with myself, there was Star Trek to go to. And especially now with all the streaming options that you have, you can pick and choose episodes that you want to watch randomly or watch through the show. You have basically you can pick from anything you want.
So as we sit here now and record this in 2019, you've seen all of Deep Space Nine, I'm sure, and probably all of TOS and all the films, I would imagine. Have you seen all of Voyager and Enterprise?
I have. As of about a month ago, I finally finished my Enterprise watch through, which I hadn't seen, I would say 80% of the shows I hadn't seen when I started watching that show. So I originally started my Voyager rewatch because I knew I was hoping to go to STLV, not this past one, but the one before that. And I really had wanted to finish watching Voyager at least before I got there. Didn't quite make it, but I was able to finish through Voyager and then carry right over to Enterprise, and was knocking off 1 or 2 episodes a night for a while there, and just finished, about a month ago.
As my listeners will know, I often live tweet my Voyager watch through, but I find that even though it's a 42-minute episode, I find it usually ends up taking me like an hour and 10 minutes when I tweet, because I have to pause it so much. And, it just sort of changes the whole dynamic. I think, oh God, I really want to watch Star Trek right now, but do I really want to do a whole thing right now? And then I gotta, get 2 devices set up and sort of swap between them, because it's a thing. But I'm enjoying it. People like to apparently engage with me when I live tweet that stuff. I guess it's amusing to see what lands with people and what doesn't.
No, I enjoy following you doing those. So I briefly thought about doing something like that, and then realized that if I did that, then I wasn't actually catching what I was supposed to be watching, because I was too busy trying to come up with something clever to say about what had just happened. And
I never worry about that. Well, as anyone who follows me on Twitter, I never worry about trying to be clever. I think that's half the fun.
Yeah, maybe. But even just type, like, I'm not one of those people that's good at multitasking with typing, and like when I go to a lecture or something, I have a hard time typing notes and paying attention and things like that. So if I'm doing a rewatch, maybe I'll start doing something like that. But if I haven't seen the episode before, I'm actually going to try to pay attention to it and not say anything until maybe after the fact. But, who knows? It's
a balancing act, right? Because you want to watch the episode, but also you want to say something about it. And sometimes you go off on a tangent about something or other, and something sponsors a shower thought that comes into your head that you want to engage people with. And it's lunacy. So you've seen it all. Does that include animated series?
It does include the animated series. I don't remember the episodes. I've seen them all, but I haven't seen them all enough to actually recall some of the details of some of them. But I do know that back when, and they might still be, but when Saturday morning cartoons were a thing, it was one of the ones in the lineup on my local station. So I would get up and watch various cartoons, and one of them was the Star Trek animated series. So I really kind of peripherally grew up with that one in addition to The Next Generation.
Very good, very good. So when you're watching it now, how do you watch it? When you just pop an episode on, are you just watching it on a tablet, or are you putting it up on a big monitor, or watching the Blu-rays if you got them, or what are you doing?
I have Blu-rays of TNG, and I have Blu-rays of the original series. But I tend to just go for the convenience factor of Netflix, even though it's funny because growing up, it was, if I wanted to watch TOS, if I wanted to pick an episode, I'd go to the video store and get one of the 5 episodes they happen to have on the shelf there, and go and put it in the machine. And now I can't be bothered to go take something off the shelf and put it in the drive. I'm just going to go to Netflix, even though my internet sometimes is spotty and the resolution isn't quite what it could be. But that's generally going to be a show that I've seen before, and just am there to enjoy the episode that I've seen before.
Well, that's interesting to me, Carl, because I was listening to a podcast that has nothing to do with Star Trek, and it was basically music people, and they were talking about this resurgence of vinyl. Mm-hmm. And the whole point that one of the guys, and these were guys who were deeply, deeply into music, was talking about the commitment of it. Mm-hmm. That to go and get up and to go through the rack in your house, because these guys all have vinyl collections, and to pick it out, pull it out, look at the liner notes, the feeling of it, putting it in the machine, putting the needle on the record, and actually saying, I am going to listen to this thing now. Mm-hmm. It changes the way that people interact with, or at least he feels that it does, that he's committing to, like, I'm going to listen to this album now. And even if he had a lossless version of it on some device, with the same audio fidelity, and, putting aside the debate that some real audiophile type people have about the warmth of the sound from vinyl versus digital, mm-hmm. which is a thing, by the way, y'all can look it up. And Carl, you're a music guy. You probably know all about that. But, putting all that aside, the idea that the physicality of it means something.
No, I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that I would also imagine that these people who go through that process and pull the record down off the shelf and stuff like that, they're actually sitting down and paying attention and listening to this record and soaking it all in and getting that experience. And sometimes I'll do that, and I'll go to the shelf and I'll put on a DVD or a Blu-ray or something and put it in the machine and watch it, because that's what I'm going to do for that period of time. Other times I'm going to put on an episode and go and dry a few dishes and walk around the house and do some things here and there and just have it on in the background. And that's okay too. I think you can have various, levels of commitment to your viewing, I think, and there's no wrong answer to it. But sometimes, if I'm in bed, waiting to not ready to go to bed yet, and it's 12:30, I'm not going to sneak downstairs and grab a Blu-ray. I think I'll just pop it on Netflix. So
you're lacking that commitment, Carl. You're lacking the commitment. You have to commit. Well, this is interesting then. So if you're a completist, you've seen all the episodes, but I assume you still watch Star Trek. In fact, the M5, in its intelligence and general internet sleuthing of you, tells me that you're doing a Deep Space Nine rewatch right now. So I imagine that you're a disciplined rewatcher. You like to go in order, or do you skip around, or is my intelligence faulty here?
No, so I do a little bit of both, where I will have and I'm saying like I've done this a lot, but this is my first time going back. And since I did my Voyager and Enterprise watch through, which I definitely watched in order just because I hadn't seen so many of them, I went back to do Deep Space Nine, and now I am watching them in order. And even when I get to an episode and I say, oh, I remember this one, and I'll still watch through it because I want to see them all. Other times I just say, today I feel like watching some random episode of Next Generation or of the original series, and then I'll just go and put that on. So it's kind of I kind of have two things going on where I have my kind of just casual sitting around and watching something for a while, or my dedicated, I'm going to watch this in order and soak it all in as the creators had intended, so to speak, of watching it straight through.
Well, depending on what series you're talking about, I think they're
True.
all very
That's
different in how they were designed. But I know, speaking for myself, once I finish Voyager, I'm going to do Enterprise straight through, which I had seen in original broadcast. There might be some I'd missed, some small number, but I think I've seen the majority of it. And by majority, I mean over 90%.
Yeah.
And I think once I'm done with that, I'm either going to be one or the other, but nothing in between. I'm either going to watch like a whole series at once or a whole season of something at once, or do completely random, like go to Professor Noor's random Star Trek generator and pick something out of that, or nothing.
Sometimes you get unfortunate answers from that one, though.
There are no wrong answers, man. Let me quote Jim Morehouse here, right? What's it going to do? Is it going to pull out Cat's Paw or Threshold? I'm going to watch it, man, because you know what? I found something to appreciate even in those episodes.
I actually like both of those episodes, so
I do too. I think they're great, and but we're going to get into some episodes a little later, so let's save that for now. Do you collect anything Star Trek related?
I do a little bit. I have a lot of books. I've always had books. My parents almost annually would give me a Star Trek book as a Christmas gift, so to speak. So I have a bunch of the older source books and the TNG technical manual and the Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise and all.
Sounds like you were a collector of more books about Star Trek rather than Star Trek books. Because when you said Star Trek books, I was thinking novels.
Yeah, so I've had a couple. I don't have that many, and I don't know why. I've read a lot of them, especially the pocket books series of the TOS novels. There's a lot of varying quality in there with those novels. There are a few that I actually really like a lot. I have a few on my shelf here. Some of the film novelizations I think are really good.
Which is your favorites of the pocket books era?
Well, not counting the films because they're kind of separate. I might have to go with the first one, the
Entropy Effect?
Entropy Effect. Yeah, that's what it's called. Yes. Yeah, so I might have to go with the Entropy Effect as one of my favorites. I just think it's a very interesting story.
Is that the one with the long-haired Sulu on the front?
Yes, it has the long-haired Sulu with the weird mustache on the front.
I can't believe I remembered that. Jiminy Christmas. There's something really important I'm going to need to remember. I'm going to forget because I remembered that. That was a strange thing to pull out of the memory bank because I know I don't have that book. I read it, but I don't have it. Or at least it might be in the garage in a box somewhere, but I'm pretty sure I haven't seen it in a long time.
Yeah.
So what was it about that story that particularly appealed to you?
Well, in a weird way, it's another one of those things that you kind of go back to how old you were when you first read or watched something. It was one of the first audiobooks I ever listened to.
Oh,
I was sick. I'd had my tonsils out when I was in third grade and couldn't really do much. I was in bed. No, so this is actually when I had the chicken pox. I remember this now because I was in bed a lot because I actually had a bad fever. And my mom went to the library and got me it was an abridged version. I didn't know what that was at the time, but it was the abridged version of The Entropy Effect. And it was read by George Takei. But then they had these inserts where Leonard Nimoy would kind of, because it's a very Spock heavy story. Mm-hmm. And some of the parts were written in first person from Spock's perspective. And I can't remember if that's in the book or if that's something they changed for the audio tape, but those parts were read by Leonard Nimoy. And I remember.
Is this the book where the crew merges?
It's the one where there's a guy who travels through time and kills Kirk. He shoots Kirk with this weird bullet.
Oh, with the bullet that has
the crushes your nerves and stuff.
Yeah, I remember this. And I remember there's a bit in there with Dr. McCoy saying any kid can make this stuff with his high school chemistry set.
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
yeah.
I remember.
Yes.
I'm on fire with the recollection tonight. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I remembered reading this one. I remember being very traumatized by it, that this guy walks onto the bridge and shoots Kirk with this incredibly horrific weapon. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and then as soon as that happens, it cuts into Leonard Nimoy talking about because he does this mind meld with Kirk and he's trying to save his life and all this, and basically he basically feels what Kirk is feeling at the time, and it's just it was traumatic to me just listening to it. And of course, I'm laying in bed sick and listening to this story. I don't even know if my mom knew what the story was. But, then if Kirk dies and McCoy has a really hard time with it. And then it's this time travel, Spock's jumping back and forth through time, trying to prevent this from happening. And there's other time travel problems going on. And it's just a very interesting story. And I've always like time travel stories, so maybe that has something to do with it too. It's just been something I've gravitated to a lot. Some are told better than others, but I always find them the multiple ways that people have found to tell time travel stories and set up different rules for how time travel works. I always find fascinating.
Have you ever read the novel Q Squared?
I have. That's another one I was going to bring up as one of my favorites.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Well, I recently read that one. So, and it's time travel. Time travel squared. I mean, it's all about temporal anomalies and these different time tracks. I mean, it's really insane. It's kind of hard to keep track of in a way when you're reading it, because then they all start to merge. It gets a little out of control, I thought.
Yeah, and well, I love the way it starts when you just hear talking about Picard and Crusher comes in, and then you find out that it's actually Jack Crusher that he's talking to, and it's this other timeline that you had no idea anything of what's going on, and they just kind of slowly dribble these little discrepancies into the story. I think Peter David set it up really well.
All right, very good. So you've got a collection of Star Trek books. Anything else?
I dabble a little bit, and I've been doing this since I was a kid, of building models. So not the ones that Eagle Moss makes, which are great, but these are the kits that you buy and you kind of paint them and put them together and stuff. And I've been putting together a few, and then they fall apart, and now it looks like the Battle of Wolf 359 over here on my shelf over here. But I need to go and do some repairs over here, but been putting a few of those together. And then the fan sets pins kind of grab me.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about the models.
Yes.
So which was your favorite that you ever built?
That I ever built.
And this doesn't mean it's your favorite ship or it's the most awesome ship in Star Trek, but sometimes when you're crafting these things, you put something together and you think, man, I did a really good job putting that together. So what I'm trying to say is there's no shame in any answer you might give me, right? It's okay. Because sometimes people say, oh, I have to say the Enterprise, or something. It's, sometimes you just, because I put those model kits together myself. So I know what goes into it when you're trying to be really good. And sometimes it just comes together really well for you.
Yeah. So I'll probably take the easy way out and say, so it's the Enterprise E probably, because the new kits now, they come with all these water decals, and you put all the detail on with these water decals, which are great because you get that cool pattern effect on the hull and everything, like that they, the different squares that they painted.
The Aztec design, the Aztec
patterns.
paint design.
So, but, and all the windows and all that stuff goes on. I mean, the decals are a pain in the butt to put on, but that's how you do the details. But when I did the Enterprise E, it was back when you basically painted everything. And I went through with I used the tip of my knife, and I painted all the windows on that thing. And it took me forever, but I kind of figured out, oh, these are going to be lit up and these are going to be dark, and went around and spent some time doing that. And I really liked the way it came out. So that's probably my favorite one. It's I have a habit of not finishing some of them because the things I've tried to build my favorite Enterprise, the refit Enterprise. I've tried to build 3 times from that old Ertl kit, and the darn nacelles just don't fit, and they just always droop and fall off, and it just would drive me nuts. So if I'd ever finish that one, it might be my favorite one, but it was also huge. I think the saucer section was about 8 or 10 inches in diameter.
It's big. Yeah. It's very big.
The newer ones are smaller.
I remembered at a convention, and this would have been in their mid 80s. Mm-hmm. I bought and this is not an official product. This was literally some guy who's like, hey, I have a kit that I put together on how to build the AMT Ertl refit Enterprise and do it with lights. Mm-hmm. And so that like the botanical garden lights up with the correct blue color, and the photon torpedoes will launch, and you can do these, all the rec room windows light up, and and so it was like photographs carbon copied or sort of put onto this typed page. I mean, it was really impossible. And you're looking at this thing that like been photocopied a little too many times, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, what does he do? It was an exercise in futility. Today, I could probably manage it if like I had no distractions and literally had like 3 weeks to myself. I could probably swing it. But at the time, as a Ute, I did not. I'm happy I bought that thing, and I'm happy I got to see how this guy did it. And I learned a little bit about how to do some modeling. But man, oh man, that was impossible.
Did you see any of the photos from STLV of that Enterprise E model that they put together?
I heard about it in some of the podcast reporting, but I didn't see any of the photos.
It was incredible. I mean, it was, I don't know, 8 feet long maybe, and they scratch built everything. and it lit up, and it looked like the model they would have filmed with. It was amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, my hat's off to those guys. So
That's wonderful. Oh, I'm sorry I missed it. So you've got the books, you've got the models. What is your most prized possession?
Ooh. What is my most prized possession of Star Trek memorabilia? It's probably going to be. Oh, that's a hard one.
Asking the real questions on the Trek Profiles podcast,
yeah,
man.
Do. Yeah. It's probably going to be, again, for the nostalgia factor, it's probably going to be that Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise, because I remember sitting on the floor in my room and reading through it like a nerdy kid who grew up watching Star Trek, and just spending hours reading that book and looking at the diagrams and just basically being a way that I kind of immersed myself in that universe, so to speak. I would look at the uniforms and say, oh, I tried to talk my mom into making me a Monster Maroon uniform at one point, and she told me no. But I said, but here's all the colors, and here's what you need, and it's written down right here on the page. And I didn't know what a pattern was at the time. But yeah, that's probably the one that at least I have the most fond memories of consuming that book, rather than just having it sitting on my shelf and looking at it and things like that. And then you can tell if you look at the book that I've read through it a couple times.
Well, it's sort of a technical manual, and there's something about certain kinds of people that I think that appeals to, right? I mean, I'm reminded, and this might have been maybe 2 years ago, my wife and I, we needed to buy her a new car. And so we went out and we bought a car, and just like all cars that you get today, it had all these electronic doodads and navigation system and all these features, and there's all these buttons that have like some kind of symbol on it. You're like, I don't really know what that symbol is, and there's beeps and lights and driver assist this and that. Well, I'm the guy who will sit down with the phone book instruction manual and literally go read it. Like, I will not operate the car until I have read the manual, and then I will look up all the things, and I'll sit in the car and I'll be like, okay. And meanwhile, she's just getting in there and like turns on the car, starts pressing buttons on the screen, and like all of a sudden it's in Chinese, and then she's like, how do I turn this off? And I was like, I don't know. I have to look in the manual, which you should have read before you got in the car. So I think there's something about certain kinds of people that they appeal to that sort of thing, where some people would look at like a technical manual for a starship, even if they're Star Trek fans, and be like, I don't want that. I want to hear more about what Mr. Spock is doing, which is great. I think it's part of the diversity of the fan community.
Absolutely.
So you'd mentioned STLV. So you've been to a Star Trek convention at the very least.
So in 2018 was my first convention period. And I only went for one day I was actually traveling for a family vacation and managed to go over for, I guess it was really 2 days, one night, and experience that. And then said, well, I think I want to do this again, but go for the full time. So I was able to go for the full time this previous one back in July, August. And that's really it. I've gone, there's a local convention in DC called AwesomeCon that happens in May. And I went there with a couple of my friends but that's all fandoms. It's not just a Star Trek convention. But we were lucky enough to have, a big TNG panel there that had Will Wheaton, who doesn't always come to these conventions. So that was neat. And also just to kind of experience the type of, it's not a Comic-Con size. It's, good, maybe 5,000 people but it's still pretty big. It was a lot of fun. I enjoy them. I find them very exhausting at times. I go more for the experience of meeting people than seeing a lot of the panels, because I feel like I've seen a lot of what they're going to say in various documentaries and featurettes and all that stuff. I am a consumer of those special features on discs and things like that. So while I'm interested to hear what the panels are going to say, I'm mostly going for the experience of meeting up with some friends of mine, some of whom I'd only met online up until that point.
I feel like we met very briefly in 2018.
We sat next to each other at dinner.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. No,
okay,
we met a couple times in passing and everything like that. So yeah, we definitely met.
Okay, because those conventions are a blur, I will say. I mean, it is really impossible when you're just meeting so many people and running around to keep track of so many things. And then, unfortunately, I do a cosplay on Saturday every year, and I meet people doing that. But because when I cosplay, I do the character. Sometimes it's not quite the experience that people want from me. And so they'll say, yes, we met, but you wouldn't talk to me, or yes, we met, but you were doing a thing. So I always have to be very careful because I remembered meeting you, but I don't remember in what context it was during the convention. So I wanted to be a little delicate there. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
So are you going to make it a regular thing to do an STLV or an Awesome Con every year? Are you going to be on the convention circuit now, visiting all the places and doing all the things?
I would like to. I don't know, especially, I mean, next year there's a lot of things going on around the same time. So I have a 7-year-old, she's going to be 8, who doesn't live with me full time, and I get her for a month. She's off for 2 months in the summer, so I get her for half of the summer, and it's looking like I'm going to have her with me during the time that STLV happens. So that's going to obviously make that not a possibility for me. I've been trying to get her into Star Trek a little bit. She watched one episode with me, and she's a little young for it, at least not age wise, but her tastes tend to run a little younger than mine did at that age, but that's fine. And then there's work trips and things. So AwesomeCon, because I live about a 10-minute walk from the convention center here in DC, that's much easier for me to get to. I don't have to get a hotel room. I don't have to travel. I just go out my door and walk. So that's a little bit easier for me to do.
Nice. And so, but like you said, you like it because you prefer the connection that you get from the other fans much more so than seeing the people in the show. Yeah.
And I have a friend who lives locally that was able to stay in the house, so she didn't have to commute. And then I know you probably know Thad Haight,
of course,
from Twitter. He came down and stayed with me too. So I was kind of able to put up a couple people that I knew, and we kind of went as a group back and forth and things like that.
So Awesome Con next year, party at Carl's place.
Something like that,
yes. That's perfect. Have you ever worn a Star Trek cosplay or a Star Trek uniform?
I have.
Which ones?
So my first Star Trek cosplay was the first STLV, and it was the Star Trek Discovery medical uniform, so the all-white uniform.
Oh, nice.
I picked it because I thought it was going to be the one that people weren't necessarily going to be getting to represent the show. I was half right. I did see a lot more blue than white, but there were quite a few people who were dressed up, and many of them wore it better than I did, but that's okay. And then for the full STLV experience, I had a couple other ones. I had a Deep Space Nine, the gray shouldered, so the latter seasons uniform. And then my kind of out there pick for the year was the incredibly stylish Dr. McCoy outfit from Star Trek 3, with the goofy suede jacket and the turtle
and the like exclamation point down his chest.
Yes, the exclamation point down the middle of his chest and everything. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think it's great. Why would you do a Star Trek cosplay? Who cares? Why bother? Why waste the money? What does it do for you?
Just because I just feel that you kind of get to inhabit that universe a little bit. And when you're in a Star Trek convention and you just see all these people walking around, some of them wear t-shirts, some of them will put on full Klingon makeup and walk around. And it was kind of my way of feeling more a part of what was going on. I don't know if that makes sense. Like in my head, like I felt just if I wore a t-shirt that had a Star Trek thing on it, I would just kind of be a tourist at this kind of event. And that's not to judge anyone who doesn't do cosplay by any means. That's just how it felt in my head. I wanted to be of the group that was there, and that was a good way to do it. And it was fun. I get to sit down and say, well, who would I want to represent at this event? And for various reasons, I've always gravitated towards the medical characters. For a long time, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I kind of technically am, but it's the wrong kind, as I've always been reminded.
You should always say, I'm a doctor, but not the kind that helps people.
Exactly.
So for our listeners, Carl, if I'm not mistaken, you're a doctor, you're a PhD, and you have one in neuroscience. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So obviously a lot of education, and obviously you'd be wearing the blue uniform in TOS land.
Yes.
Working down in the lab, getting the results for Mr. Spock. Exactly. Probably a pretty harsh taskmaster up under the bridge.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to work under Mr. Spock. I don't think he'd be. Although having worked in academia and for a lot of researchers and professors and things, I think the Mr. Spock personality probably would be a familiar one to me as well, just for some of the people I've interacted with.
But I note an interesting connection between what you just said about cosplay and what we were talking earlier about music, which is that we were talking earlier about vinyl and people saying, okay, I'm going to commit to listening to this album. I'm going to get up and put it on and put the needle on the record and I'm going to sit in a chair and just listen to it. If you're going to a convention and you're going to invest the money in a cosplay, you are committed.
Yes.
You are publicly declaring that you're part of the tribe. In a way that's very different. If you're just in like your typical, I got my white polo shirt on and a pair of cargo shorts and some flip-flops, and I'm just going to walk around the convention for the day, you're labeling yourself as someone who's like, no, I'm in it to really be a part of this and to be present and to be with the group. And I think it's a similar kind of mental dynamic of really committing to the fandom in a way. And that's not to take anything away from people who just don't have an interest in that. I think it's fine. But I think there's a psychology in the part of those who are doing this to really put themselves in the moment, to put themselves out there, that I think is a little bit different from those who choose not to. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, and tying it back to the music listening experience, I think that's a very astute observation. I hadn't even thought of that. But yeah, you have the people who are, the vinyl listeners, the cosplayers, the people who are going to go full bore onto this thing. And then the people who are there who, for whatever reason, and they're all perfectly valid reasons, they just would rather have the experience of being at the convention without dealing with all the cost. Like, I don't want to take a second suitcase with me on this trip, or don't want to have to deal with wearing potentially very uncomfortable clothing for 6 hours and walking around. Some of those costumes aren't exactly made for real use, I would say. So, but another positive thing I thought with the cosplay is I'm not very good often in large gathering environments. I tend to be the Barkley guy that kind of hangs off to the side and stares at the potted plant while people are kind of off making friends and talking and everything. And I thought that, by putting on something as ridiculous as the Dr. McCoy outfit, that's going to draw some attention, and that's going to get people to just want to say hello and talk to me, because they're going to say, oh, that's interesting, or, why would you wear that? Or who knows what they would say, but at least it would be making me get out of my comfort zone a little bit. I can't exactly hide in the background when I'm wearing something that ridiculous looking. So it did work to a degree. I got to say hello to some people who I probably would have just walked by and not really interacted with otherwise.
It's really weird for me because, as I indicated earlier, when I do a cosplay, I feel like I have to do the character. Mm-hmm. I don't just want to put on a getup and then just walk around and be like, "Hey, check this out! Look at me!" It's much more. I want to act and I want to do the thing. And sometimes I notice that people would be incredibly reticent to want to walk up to me, and I could see it. You can tell. I mean, we have thousands of years of evolution of being able to size up what other people are up to, and sometimes I can see people really wanted to come up. And it's like, look, man, I did not get dressed up in this, do all this makeup to like not be noticed. Mm-hmm. I didn't do any of this so that I could be shy. Right? If you want to come up and talk to me, you can come up and talk to me. Like, I wouldn't have done this otherwise, right? Yeah. And not to say that you have permission to be a jerk or can be mean or anything like that, and of course, just because you're cosplaying, it doesn't mean that you've consented to inappropriate behavior. But you are absolutely allowed to notice people and say, "Hey, that's an amazing costume," or to engage with them on whatever terms that seem appropriate. That's the game. You bought the ticket, you're already taking the ride. Right. I'm on the roller coaster. Is it okay for me to put my arms up? Yes. Yes. It is okay to put your. Yes, you can even scream if you want. It's included in the price. It's all okay.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, I think we should get into some episodes, Carl. That's what I think. Are you game?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So I had the M5 do a intelligence dossier and do some gentle internet sleuthing, as is his wont. And heaven knows what he's doing right now. But he has indicated some episodes that might be worth our time. And one of those is Devil in the Dark, certainly an all-time favorite, certainly in many people's lists, one of the best of all Star Trek. But the M5 said this would be a particularly interesting episode for you and I to talk about. Why do you think that is? Please tell me why this showed up on the intelligence profile for you.
So I think if you're going to look at the entire canvas of Star Trek, all the episodes out there, it's probably the one or one of a couple that really distills down what the message of Star Trek really is about, where, you're confronted with this thing. It's scary. We don't know what's going on. It's causing problems. And then it turns out that you didn't understand where this creature was coming from. You couldn't communicate with it. It couldn't communicate with you. So it was a big misunderstanding of what was happening. And we were actually kind of the villains of the story in a way, because, here you have a creature who's defending its territory.
Yeah, not in a way. We were the villains.
Right.
Not in a way.
Yeah, no, okay.
We were straight up the villains.
We definitely were the villains, yeah. And, it took, as it always does, it takes our intrepid crew to come down and figure out what the problem is. But it's not a story of killing the bad guy at the end of the episode. It's not a story of, defeating some terrible plot that's going on. It boils down to being able to talk to somebody and find out what the problem is and coming to a mutually agreed decision, because at the end of the episode, the Horde is actually helping the people that it was terrorizing at the beginning of the episode. It's starting to help them do their job in a way that isn't going to affect its eggs, basically, that it was defending. It was defending its nest.
The miners you're talking about.
The miners, yeah.
Of which there seems to be an inordinate number in TOS for some reason. Every time they come across a planet, there seems to be some forlorn group of like very gritty looking miners there who are either looking for wives or getting eaten by space monsters or something. It just seems to be a constant for some reason in the TOS era. I'm not sure what that's about.
I don't know either, but you're not wrong there. It's they're everywhere, and it makes you wonder what life is like if you're not on a starship, especially in the 23rd century. What your day-to-day life is like in the Federation if you're not part of the crew.
I seem to recall a Star Trek novel that I don't think I've read, but I've heard about, that posits that at some point, possibly in the TNG era, there's a Horta member of Starfleet, which I think would be just amazing.
That sounds vaguely familiar to me, but I've never read, or I wouldn't be able to recall the episode or the novel name. But for some reason, that one fact does kind of stick out to me as being something that I've heard somewhere.
Well, the thing that I think is so interesting about it is that it has a wonderful Star Trek message, right? Which is, if you're the captain of a ship and you have a Horta crew member, you have someone on the ship who can literally do things that no one else on the ship can even imagine doing. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was in the Navy and I worked on reactor plans on a submarine. I've talked about this many times on the ship. And there was a guy that I was in schooling with who had a hand which was not the typical 5 fingers on a hand. And it wasn't an accident. He was born this way. And essentially, he had just a regular thumb, an index finger, a middle finger, and nothing else. Okay. And that's how his hand was. And it was just a very small hand, but it literally was the same fingers that most people have. Mm-hmm. So he was able to grasp things and to drive and to do all the normal things. It's just these 2 other fingers and the rest of his hand was not there. And so his hand was incredibly small. And I remember he was a friend of mine, and I remembered asking him about that once. And I was like, oh, were you worried that they weren't going to let you into the Navy with that? Because, there's all this medical stuff when you join the military, right? Do you have any defects or any problems, anything they might need to worry about, and there's all kinds of reasons you can be disqualified. And he said, yeah, he was. But the fact is that one of the recruiters in the office is like, no, he's an advantage because he's going to be able to put his hand into equipment that nobody else can put their hand into. Mm-hmm. Right. He's going to be able to reach his hand behind that thing and pull that bolt out that's stuck that these other guys with sausage fingers aren't going to be able to get close to. Mm-hmm. And, you're exactly. And I remember thinking, wow, that's amazing. Right. And whenever I watch Devil in the Dark, I always think about that guy. We lost contact over the years, but I always think about that idea that it really is a very much Star Trek message that 1 + 1 = 3. Or 5, or sometimes 10. Mm-hmm. And it was a really beautiful message. And I think it's really one that's put into Devil in the Dark.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, then I think we should talk about a Star Trek movie. And I bring this up with some trepidation, Carl, because you and I engage on Twitter quite a bit there. Engage on Twitter. See what I did there? And it seems like whenever we're talking on Twitter, accidentally, we can fall into reciting lines from Star Trek 3 back and forth to each other from memory. But yet the M5 says we should talk about Star Trek 3. So we will resist the urge We will resist, just like Spock trying to resist his Ponfar. We will resist trying to just do the whole spider pilot captain guy in the bar scene or back in the Enterprise out of the space dock scene. But I'm really interested as to why this piece of Star Trek was flagged for us to talk about. Do you think it's one of the best of all Star Trek, or is it something that's personally meaningful to you, or both?
So it's definitely a little bit of both, because Star Trek 3 was the first thing I ever saw that was Star Trek. It was the movie that my mother sat me down to watch when I was 5, when she said, I really love this thing called Star Trek. I think you'll like it too. Here's something to watch. And for whatever reason, she decided to pick Star Trek 3. I think she had just had it videotaped when that was a thing off of Showtime, which still exists now. But because I remember it was on a little, video cassette that my mom or my dad had recorded from. And, I remember that the opening of the Paramount logo, and then the white fade to white, and then you get the little insert of the scene from the end of Star Trek 2 in black and white and kind of inset in the middle of the screen. And then it slowly repeats Spock's death scene and then the funeral. And that really hooked me. And that was before I really even knew who the characters were, other than Kirk was a name and Spock was a name, and he had pointed ears, and Dr. McCoy was the doctor. And I kind of got a little bit of a rundown from my mom about who the characters were, but I didn't, I had no emotional attachment to them. So I just remember loving pretty much everything that happened in the film. I didn't know who Christopher Lloyd was at the time. I hadn't seen Taxi or Back to the Future or any of those other things. So I just knew him. I've always thought of him at first as being Krug rather than any of the other more famous people he's played. And there's just something about the story to me that I really enjoy, that the fact that it's a character focused story of, we have our intrepid crew of the Enterprise who have lost Spock, and Kirk finds a way he might be able to rescue Spock and McCoy, who's also suffering because of the effects of this mind meld, and he's going to basically risk his career to save his friend's life and his 2 friends' lives. And there's just something that I love about the fact that and then there's that great scene when they go on the bridge and Kirk says to Scotty and to Sulu and the others, okay, I'm not going to ask you to go any further. McCoy and I have to go. You don't have to go. And they just basically blow him off and say, well, what course are we doing? And they're all along because they're going together. And, to make a potentially controversial comment, I mean, I think Star Trek 3 to me is a better Star Trek film than Star Trek 2. And that's not to say Star Trek 2 is better than, or is not as good as Star Trek 3 as a film. But I think that the themes and the ideas that are put out there in the Star Trek universe are better reflected, I think, in Star Trek 3. Whereas you have Star Trek 2, which is a very exciting action adventure kind of film that really is not quite the usual type of story you were used to getting from the TOS episodes. Whereas I think Star Trek 3 would fit in pretty well within that group of stories.
Star Trek 2 was certainly a Captain Ahab type story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we have it reversed, and Khan is the captain, and Kirk is the great white whale. Yeah,
right. Yes.
But Star Trek 3 sort of has a different spin on it. But as your friendly interlocutor and interviewer, it is my job to lay your fandom out on the table, Carl, and really to extract the truth via this interview, which I'm sure is sounding torturous to you at this point in time, saying, when's this guy going to quit? But you'd said that this is the most Star Trek, or very much has more Star Trek in it than Star Trek 2. So that implies that you have some yardstick to determine what Star Trek is. And I think that should be the subject of our inquisition now. So how are you determining what is the most Star Trek, or more Star Trek and less Star Trek? What is the Star Trek content of a film? How do you adjudicate that?
I mean, I just think that, and this is really thinking back on the original series, comparing it to the original series, because I think that's what's fair, because that's when the film came out. We didn't have all these other films that came after it. Whereas in Star Trek 2, you have the Black Hat character that is driving the story, essentially. The whole reason that anything happens in Star Trek 2 is because Khan escapes and steals a ship and goes after the Enterprise. So it sort of lends our characters, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, et cetera, kind of in a reactionary role. So they're doing what they're doing because of what Khan is doing. And Star Trek 3, on the other hand, it's them basically driving the story. Kirk makes the decision to go and save Spock and McCoy. And then there's real consequences to that decision. And that feels very classic Star Trek, where you get what you wanted, but there's something that's going to happen as a result. So Kirk does get to save Spock. He does get to save McCoy.
But at the price of David.
At the price of David, at the price of the Enterprise. And as far as we know, at the price of all of their careers, because we don't know what's going to happen when they go back home. You have to go see you have to take the voyage home to find out what happens there. So it feels more like a story that's based around the main characters of the show, rather than all the emphasis being on Khan, and then kind of how our crew deals with that. And then there's other crew thrown in there as well, which is good. I like all the characters they added to Star Trek 2. But I just feel that the third film really is all about our crew and what they decide to do, and the consequences that their actions then result in.
So let me repeat back what I heard, and you tell me if I've got it.
Mm-hmm.
So in that Star Trek 2 is that our characters, our heroes, all the Kirk, Spock, McCoy, all of them, they're more of responding to things which are happening externally, whereas in Star Trek 3, they're the prime movers. They have agency. They take positive action to initiate something which you feel is much more in the spirit of TOS. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's the point I'm making. I can think of examples where that doesn't necessarily hold in TOS now that I think about it more, but because they really are the kind of crew that goes in and mops up problems in a lot of ways in TOS. So,
that's certainly true. But I think one of the things that's important when, especially looking at older Trek, whether it's TOS, animated series, or even any of the 90s Treks, is that you have to situate them in time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really something to think about. Here we got John Larroquette from Night Court as a Klingon.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Christopher Lloyd, who is best known as Reverend Jim from Taxi, and Doc Brown from Back to the Future, playing this very different kind of character, which he does amazingly in.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly was a very big change from the kind of characters he was used to getting. And here's a little bit of interesting sideline for you. At the same time that this movie was in the theaters, summer of '84, Ghostbusters was in the theater, Gremlins, Karate Kid, Conan the Destroyer, The Last Starfighter, and The Muppets Take Manhattan.
Wow.
All those films were in the theater at the same time. I think it was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, too. Were all in the theater at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think to myself, that those are all summer of '84 films. And I just think to myself, what an amazing choice to walk into the theater and to have all these incredible choices of what to see, right? I mean, it must have been a golden age that summer. And I was around. I remembered walking into the theater. It would have been Valley Stream, New York, and walking into the theater and being like, oh my gosh, what do I see? I think, shall I see Star Trek 3 for the 8th time? Or shall I see this Indiana Jones thing? I don't know. Star Trek. So you didn't have, now this is something I want to get into for a second. Mm-hmm. You didn't have the reaction that I think some of us had who had seen Star Trek 2 with the sudden replacement Saavik.
No.
So Robin Curtis was your first Saavik. So that was okay. How was it for you when you went back to Star Trek 2 and suddenly there's Kirstie Alley?
I don't know if I had much of a reaction to it, simply because I probably would have been 6 or 7. And I mean, I remember talking about reactions. I remember going back and watching TOS for the first time and being really confused because Shatner's hair was so different than it was in Star Trek 3, which is the first time I saw him. I'm like, wait, is that the same guy? Like he has blonde hair now. What's going, or whatever, brown, blonde, whatever his hair is. So I did notice that, but I don't really know that I made a notice in my head of Saavik being different until I was old enough really to notice the character choices that the actors made that were very different. I mean, Saavik she's full on Vulcan. In Robin Curtis's interpretation of Saavik is full on Vulcan, whereas I think back when Nicholas Meyer was doing things, they had, if you read the novel, she's actually half Romulan. And
By
Kirstie
the
Alley,
way, that was actually filmed.
yeah, and they cut it out.
You can find it on YouTube, by the way, if you search. There's that whole sequence where Kirk and Spock are in Starfleet Academy in the lobby outside the Kobayashi Maru, and there's an extended sequence where Spock talks about the fact that Saavik is half Romulan and she has all these different kind of feelings inside of her, and she's not managing them well at this point. And all that's been filmed. It wasn't in the final film, so it's not, heaven help me, canonical, but it was all filmed. And so that is out there. But I will say that I had the hardest time in Star Trek's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe not 5 and 6, but separating the novelizations from the films. I don't know if you had the same feeling, but I feel like those novels and the films are intertwined in a way that I can't really separate. And they're all merged, and I just sort of take them as one thing, even though there's stuff in the novels that in no way appeared in the movies.
Well, and that was really interesting to me. If you see the film and then you read the book, and usually if you read the book of the film or whatever you want to call it, it's basically, we're going to turn the script into prose. But there's so much in some of those novels that is so divergent from the movie. It's kind of amazing to me, because I guess they told Vonda McIntyre, who wrote the first few of them, just basically, you can do what you want as long as you tell the story that's in the film. You can kind of do your own thing, because I recently reread the Star Trek 3 novel, and I made a note that I believe it's page 79 or something like that, where the first scene in Star Trek 3, when he's doing his personal log and walking around the bridge and lamenting about how it feels like the house with all the children gone, et cetera, et cetera. That's like 80 pages into the book. And the book starts with they have a memorial service for Spock, and then characters get drunk, and David and Saavik end up hooking up together. And there's a whole plot through the entire book that it really colors the way you can view some of the scenes between the two of them in the film.
Oh, yes. And I remember being a very young kid, and I might have been, 13, 14 at the time, reading that novel and reading the pillow talk between David and Saavik, where they're like, lying next to you is like lying in the springs on a cold, fall evening. And I remember thinking, is this how people talk to each other? It literally is ripped from a Harlequin romance novel. Some of these lines in there. And as a young kid, I remembered reading it being like, is this how adults talk to each other? Like, I better study this, which was a very bad decision. But it was really something else. And it really gave a whole new depth to how I watched the films going forward. I don't know how you felt about it.
No, definitely. I mean, there's little, and it's probably because I've read them that then I watch a scene and I put subtext in there that isn't really intended to be there. But the scene when she basically reads David the Riot Act for using the protomatter, and you can tell like there's definitely something going on between the two. They seem to have more of a definitely a stronger relationship than you would expect for two people who just got randomly assigned to the science ship. And I also like the fact that it seems basic, like in that pillow talk scene where Saavik is basically admitting like, oh, I just wanted to see what it was like to do this with a human. And it's almost the same thing that T'Pol does to Trip later in Enterprise, where he's basically an experiment to her in some way, where it didn't start off at least as a romantic relationship. It was more like, oh, I just wanted to try it and see what happened kind of thing.
There's some tremendous pathos, I think, in that Star Trek 3 novelization in the Saavik character in particular, that there's a whole section that really explores her origin story. And this idea that she came from this planet, which was horrible. I mean, the things that they used to say about Tasha Yar and TNG, like the kind of planet she came from, that times 10. And like the thing you could do for the person you love the most is when they eventually got killed, you could sit by their body overnight, just one night, because they were going to be devoured by other beings. So that was like the way you could demonstrate your love was when they die, you just sit by their body for at least one night before they get devoured by whatever kind of horrible things were out there. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh. And the idea that a Romulan Vulcan fusion, a mating, the Romulan government said that such biological matings were not possible. Therefore, Saavik doesn't exist. Like any these fusions do not exist, to being told you don't even exist as a being. I mean, what pathos is that, right? And as a kid, I was reading it. I mean, it was really heavy stuff.
No, absolutely. And I know and I don't remember if it was David or if it's that she has that reaction to and sits up with, or I think it might actually be in Star Trek 2, where when Peter Preston, who gets totally screwed over by the editing of the original film, but when
right, no, that's Star Trek 2.
No, but yeah. So I think it's actually his character that she stays with, because she takes his death very hard as well, which is something we don't get other than that weird little reaction that she has when Scotty brings him up to the bridge. We don't really know that they have any kind of connection to each other. But I think she's a tutor or mentor or something for him, which is more depth again that you get in these books.
By the way, as a service to our listeners, there's a whole bunch of stuff about Scotty. I can't remember if it's in the Star Trek 2 or Star Trek 3 novelization, but they were written by the same author, Vonda McIntyre, who recently passed away, I think, within the last 12 months or so as we record this. But there's a whole bunch of stuff about Scotty and him going back to his sister and telling her about the death of her son and all this, which really gives Scotty a very deep dive that we never get in anywhere else. And you get to see kind of how he is. And I don't want to spoil it. In fact, I think that's the right idea. But let's just say it's a very different sort of way he is with his family than how he is on the ship. And I just want to leave it there. It's a nice surprise. It's a nice surprise. No, it's a surprise when you read the book. Yeah. Let's just leave it at that. So I encourage everybody to go out, read the novelization of at least 1, 2, and 3. You will be amazed at the stuff that is in there, because it is wildly different in many cases from what you see in the movie, especially 1, because the novelization of 1 was written by the great bird himself, Gene Roddenberry. So if any canonistas want to get into an argument about it, it was written by Roddenberry. So I'm not sure there's any more canonical than that. And the stuff that's in that book is cray.
It is.
Just go check it out. You will or may not be disappointed. I don't know. I leave that as an exercise to the listener. Let's move on to the TNG era. There's 2 to talk about in this one, and I think we'll do them one at a time. Both stellar episodes in very different ways. The first is The Wounded. This is where we have Ben Maxwell, the wonderful commander of the USS Phoenix, his older ship, the Rutledge, where he served with O'Brien, the Minstrel Boys song, tales about the Battle of Setlik III versus the Cardassians, a lot of good O'Brien stuff. Tell me why this episode is on the list, Carl. What about it is special?
It is I think it's one of the best episodes they did in TNG, but the reason I picked it is twofold. It introduces my favorite alien race, which you alluded to at the very beginning, the Cardassians, who, unlike so many of the quote-unquote villainous races of Star Trek, seems to actually have a 3-dimensional bent to them. You don't get the generic, like you get Romulans who could be any Romulan, essentially. It's just their names aren't that important. But I feel like with the Cardassians...
I got to say there, just one little aside, which is I always feel like the Romulans got the short shrift.
I agree. Absolutely.
I always feel like there was a whole culture there that we never got to understand on why they were the way they were. And now I'm going to get really controversial. Please send your emails to me. Don't tweet Carl. But the Klingons that we see most of the time are pretty much Romulans. They're these crafty, sort of political, very sort of underhanded sort of people. The very worst things the Klingons say about the Romulans are true about the Klingons.
Yep.
Not Worf, because he's not a Klingon. He's biologically a Klingon, but not in any other way. So anyway, I just want to say I have been waiting for the deep dive into the Romulans that we never got, except in some novels. But I've been waiting for that on screen. We never got it, so color me disappointed. Please continue. I'm sorry to have interrupted you with
not at all.
You pressed a rant button there, Carl. Sorry.
That's perfectly fine. No, so you introduce the Cardassians, who then, obviously take on a huge role down the road. It's also really the first episode that you actually get to see O'Brien as a real character. And I mean, I don't think any of Deep Space Nine really even comes about without this episode. It sets up so many different things in the Star Trek universe. It's a wonderful story about, what happens to people who go to war and then are broken, essentially, and can't be made right again. What do we do with these people who are competent and are very good at their job when their job is in wartime, but then you end up going to peacetime, and some people just can't handle that. And it's a very real issue that we deal with in real life, and with people who come back from service and can't readjust to peaceful life. And then you have the great setup with the Cardassians, who are obviously doing something up to no good. And the thing that I really like about the very end of the story, when you find out that Maxwell has probably been right this whole time, he's not just gone crazy and can't see what's going on. He really does see what's going on. He's the one that is able to suss out that there are bad things going on in closed doors and behind the scenes. And the way that episode ends, I just love how it sets up basically what follows after that.
What's the most Star Trek thing about the episode The Wounded?
I would say that it's in the fact that it tells a story that is not a black and white story. It's a very nuanced story. Again, we have these Cardassians who we're helping because we've been asked to help them by hunting down one of our own. But they're doing things behind the scenes that are an antagonistic thing. You have a character who has seemingly gone off the rails, but that's partly the case, but that's not the entire story to it. So you have a very nuanced relationship between all these characters going on that I think is something that Star Trek does really well when it's doing what it does really well. You have that wonderful scene with the Cardassian and O'Brien in 10 Forward, when O'Brien explains what happened in Setlik 3 and why he was being rude. It initially starts because he goes to apologize almost to the Cardassian for being rude to him earlier. And then it turns into this thing where he admits that I don't hate you. I hate what you made me become through, the war that he had experienced. So it shines a light on these very topical issues that are something we deal with in real life, but in its setting, it allows us to explore them in a way I think that is what Star Trek does really well when it's firing on all cylinders. It can look at current events, so to speak, in a way that it almost tricks you into not realizing what you're studying until you kind of get to the end. You're like, oh wait, I get what they're getting at with this story. This one's a little more obvious than some, I would say, but it certainly explores these issues in a way that might not be as either interesting or easy to watch, let's say, if it were a true story about PTSD from some soldier that came home from the Middle East or something like that it could be an interesting story. It just might be a lot harder to watch than something that's taking place in the future on a spaceship.
It's interesting that you talk about this because as a veteran, I have a certain insight into some parts of this, but and certainly not into others because I was in the Navy, right? And when people meet me and they say, "Oh, thank you for your service," I hate that, right? I just secure that nonsense right now. Please don't do that. I was not one of the Marines at Fallujah. I never carried an M16. I wasn't driving around in an M1A1 tank, right? I didn't have a service sidearm. I worked on a submarine in the engine room. My greatest enemy was getting hurt in an industrial accident or touching something I wasn't supposed to and getting hurt. An OSHA incident. That was my number one thing that I was in fear of was accidentally touching a live electrical conductor or something. We were never in danger. We were the danger. That's what I tell you. But certainly being part of a veterans community, which I am, I know a lot of guys who are very damaged and wounded, to coin a term, by what went on. And when I was doing my Deep Space Nine rewatch on Twitter, very publicly, someone asked me about the siege of AR 553, or is it 559? I don't remember the name of the episode exactly, but it's, everyone knows which one I'm talking about. But someone asked me what I thought about the episode, and I was like, I can't even talk about it because I know too many guys. Yeah. I know too many guys are hurt, and I don't even want to talk about the episode because nothing I say will be my opinion as a Star Trek fan. I have too many other opinions that I bring to it because of my life experiences that colored how I thought about it. And so when I watched this episode in preparation for this, I will say that the Maxwell story was far less interesting to me than the O'Brien story talking to his Cardassian counterpart, because I was reminded of a book that had a big effect on me when I was a kiddo. I don't know if you had ever read it, but I remember that this book was the first book I was assigned to read for freshman English class in 9th grade, and it was a book called Fail Safe.
Hmm.
Had you ever read this?
I've heard of it. I've never read it.
There's also a movie made out of it, which hilariously has Dom DeLuise as like an army corporal. The younger people are like, "Who's Dom DeLuise?" But anyway, I don't recommend the movie, but the book is incredible. And here's the summary of it in a nutshell. There's a computer error, and in the computer error, it sends a wing of United States Air Force bombers on a nuclear launch to drop bombs on Moscow.
Okay.
And the guys flying the bomber really think they've been given a correct launch order. They are not bad guys. They are doing the best they can. And they're told, in their correct authenticated launch orders, because of a computer error that they don't know about, drop bombs on Moscow. And the novel is really about the Russian translator for the president, who doesn't get to work all that much.
Okay.
And he got kind of this cushy Washington job where he goes to Washington, and because remember, this is in the 60s, so he doesn't actually work all that much. And so he just kind of goes to the office and has lunch and reads the paper and hangs out and kind of reads academic literature on Russian literature. And all of a sudden he gets the call. It's like, come to the president's office, come to the Oval Office right now. And he's like, what? And he goes up there, and it's like, there's this major thing. I'm about to call the secretary of the Communist Party, and you have to translate. And we don't have a time to set anything up. This is all going to be happening right now. And it's all told from his perspective in a lot of ways. And he's sort of this guy who's just a witness. And the U.S. president is saying, hey, look, there's these bombers coming, and they're going to bomb you. And they really think that they're given this launch order was a computer error. Please, let's not launch nuclear weapons and kill the planet. And the general secretary tells him, you know what? I believe you. It doesn't matter that I believe you, because if I don't launch, they're going to kill me. And the next guy, he's going to launch. So I'm going to launch, and that's going to happen now. And so just know that that's what's going to happen, even though I don't want to, because I don't have the choice of making a choice.
Okay.
And what happens is they actually say, well, what if we can help you shoot those guys down? And a bunch of Army and Air Force officers are given connection to these Russian anti-aircraft bomber guys and ground defense teams to give them all the information on how to defeat the countermeasures of the American bombers. And it's these soldiers who are like, I joined the military to fight communism, like actual legit 100% communists, right? And and that's you, dude. And it was this scene where he's trying to tell him like, well, you could try this technique, that might work, it might not, I don't know. And he's like, but he's trying to say like, is this really me saying these words, or if I put the wrong emphasis on something, is it because I don't really want to tell him the right thing? And it was all this pathos about these guys who are put into this impossible situation. Whereas a soldier, you're told, these people are your enemy. And now he's told, nope, tell them everything, just get them to do it. And it, as a kid in high school, as a freshman, this book was traumatizing. But that's what I remember from that episode. Whenever I watch it, is O'Brien trying to relate to his counterpart and just being like, I hate you. And I don't hate you, but I hate you.
Right.
And it brings back my experience in high school reading that book. And it really touched me. And it's a very powerful episode that's full of pathos and also has a lot of really interesting ideas about foreign relations and how we should behave in this circumstance. I mean, it's really something special.
Well, I like, at the very end, that last scene where Picard basically confronts Gulmasset and says, Maxwell was onto something, and there really were weapons on that ship or whatever he says. And then Gulmasset says, well, if you believe that, why didn't you go board the ship? And he said, well, because then we'd be going to war, and I was sent here to keep the peace between us, and we wouldn't be having this conversation if I'd done that. So he makes the choice to keep the peace, despite the fact that he could have proven Maxwell's intentions were the right choice.
One of the things that I think is interesting about this episode, and here's where I want to get into something about you in particular, Carl, is that your handle on Twitter is Listening to Film.
Yep.
You obviously have a very big interest in how music is used in all kinds of films, also in Star Trek, of course, as part of your Star Trek fandom. So first, I want to ask, what's the origin of this interest in cinematic music? And second, What did you think about the usage of the Minstrel Boy song in this particular episode? So let's attack those in order. Tell us about why you have such an interest in cinematic music and why that's such a big deal for you. Because you tweet often about scores and different music cues and things like that.
Scores let you affect the mood of what you're seeing in a way that I think is very unique from, just the acting or the words you put into the actor's mouth or anything like that. I think it can really affect how you react to what you're seeing. There's a great line that Nicholas Meyer says in at least one of his commentaries. He tends to repeat himself, but he says that sound always dominates picture. And said if you saw a film of a little girl running through a field of daisies and you play the funeral march over that scene, that girl is going to die of an incurable disease. Like in your head, you're going to say something really bad is going to happen to that poor kid, even though she's happy and running through a field of daisies. Because of the music I'm hearing in my head, I feel really bad for her right now, even though there's no real reason to do that. Nothing is actually happening on screen that would cause you to feel bad for this person.
Let me offer an alternative take for you to respond to. And I always do this, and I always have to preface it by a little throat clearing just to say I'm not trying to raise the temperature, but I really want to understand your point of view. So there are some particular shows which have taken a different tack. In particular, I want to think about The Sopranos. Certainly a very well-recognized show, certainly an achievement in cinema, whether you like the show or not. It certainly got a lot of recognition. There is no music in the show which is not in universe. All the music you hear in that show, the characters are hearing as they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so other people will tell you that a musical score is a cheat because it's telling the audience how to feel. And if you can't deliver that with what your actors are doing and what your staging is doing and what your story is doing, then you have to cheat and go to a score. How does that sit with you, and how do you react to it?
Well, I think it kind of goes almost back to the same conversation about the vinyl records versus things. There's more than one way to do it. I think for a show like The Sopranos, which I'll be honest, I haven't seen a lot of. I've seen some of the episodes, but it's meant to be very grounded and very real, I guess. I mean, some of the circumstances might be a little out there, but you're almost watching like a documentary, so to speak, or something along the lines of you're watching real life happen as it happens. And I completely understand their decision to not put music behind that. Like, think about Star Trek 2. There's the scene when Khan and Kirk confront each other for the first time, and they do the prefix code, and they temporarily defeat Khan. And there's that scene where they have the close up of the saucer section of the Enterprise, and the Reliant goes flying overhead. Imagine that without the music. It's just two models kind of flying past each other, but because they put the music in, suddenly that becomes an exciting moment in the film.
I will give you I think, an even more cogent example.
Okay.
Which is in Star Trek 3, Stealing the Enterprise.
Stealing the Enterprise,
it's
backing
three
up.
Old guys back in the car out of the garage.
Yes. I didn't want to go there, but yes, that certainly adds a lot of excitement to a scene that could have been kind of boring if you just watch the Enterprise slowly backing out of the garage, like you said. But to go back to your first question about how did I first start to get interested, one example I always point to is in Star Trek 3. And I don't know if this was the first time I saw it or if it was some other time, but there's a scene in Star Trek 3 where David is watching the sunset on Genesis, and he's standing there on the cliff, and there's these swirling strings that kick in, and it's this very evocative piece of music that James Horner wrote as the sun goes down and then the moon comes up. And I just remember thinking to myself, wow, that's it. In one way, it might not have been doing what the composer wants because I was noticing the music at the time, because they also have this fine line where they have to walk, where they want to affect the scene, but they also don't want to stand out in a lot of ways over what you're watching. It should kind of feel like a cohesive thing. And in that moment, I definitely was noticing the music more than I was noticing. It was just, Merritt Buttrick looking at probably a blue screen. But so that's one example of where I really first realized that I noticed that the music was doing something to affect the scene in that instance.
Did you study music, or is this just a hobby or something you're just interested in, or is it something off the side? Or
so I play the saxophone. I haven't in many years. I did I picked it up in elementary school, as kids are wont to do, and then torture their parents by making them go to elementary school concerts, which I'm looking forward to experiencing that myself at some point. Uh, and I took a couple semesters of music theory in college, just kind of out of interest more than anything else. It certainly wasn't tied to my major or anything like that. It was an elective that I could do. But I've always, it's been a hobby / something maybe slightly more than a hobby, but not anything that I've ever done professionally or seriously.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
And then you asked about the Minstrel Boy song. I feel like the way it's introduced in that episode's a little clumsy, where basically he's making some kind of potato casserole thing for Keiko and then is just humming this song that happens to be something that's important for that crew. I find the O'Brien Keiko scenes in that episode to be painful, but
as are most O'Brien Keiko scenes.
They are, unfortunately. But I do like the scene between Captain Maxwell and O'Brien at the end, where and again, it's a little clumsily introduced, where he's like, what was the name of that song that you happened to be singing earlier in the film or in the show? But I think the way that they kind of play off of that, it works really well to me, where O'Brien starts to sing and then Maxwell joins in and then kind of trails off at the end because he's kind of realizing that he's been had and he's not going to win the situation he's in. One thing that I really like about that song, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but in the final episode of Deep Space Nine, in What You Leave Behind, right before they do that montage with the Sinatra song, they show a scene of O'Brien. His quarters are all packed up and he's about to leave, and he stops because he notices something, and he walks over, and there's a little soldier figure on the floor that he'd been doing the battles with Dr. Bashir. He picks it up and they play the Minstrel Boy song. It's sort of like almost a character moment in the music. I don't think they ever do it any other time, but it's like the last we see of O'Brien, and they play that song again. And I just thought it was a really neat way of bookending the O'Brien story, because The Wounded is really where O'Brien becomes a three-dimensional character and not somebody who just hangs around the transporter room. And then this is the last scene we're going to get with him, and they play that song again, which I thought was an interesting touch.
I really thought that the song was a force multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
If you cut the song out of the episode and replaced it with like a line of poetry or something, I just don't think it would be there. I think that song punches up the episode by, like, it cubes it as opposed to squares it. If it had been something else, it really is an essential ingredient in the burrito that really makes it something special. So it's an episode that I think touched me, and I think it was a great pick, and I'm glad to have talked about it with you. But I want to move on now to talk about the finale of TNG. I want to talk about All Good Things. I have my own particular interest in this episode because I have a strange history with it, but I'm curious as to your particular history with it, as this is an episode that no one has ever picked on Trek Profiles before. But certainly a very interesting and fascinating series finale. And we have Picard, who suddenly decides to engage with his crew, which is very much against how he's been throughout the whole series. He chose, as a personal strategy and as a captaining strategy, to hold himself aloof, which, by the way, from my own experience with Navy captains, is how most of them do. They sort of want to be these like revered father figures and not really be around too much for you to notice their flaws, much less play cards with you. So I thought it was interesting that he chooses to do something different in this episode. Please tell me about your reactions and how you feel about All Good Things.
So as I mentioned, at the beginning, I really did grow up watching TNG.
So you watched it when it was originally broadcast in sequence?
I did watch it in sequence when it was originally broadcast. And so this is really the first time that a show that I loved and really knew for not my entire life, but a good portion of the part of my life that I'd remembered up until that point was going away. Like, they're saying, this is the last one, we're never getting any more. And I mean, I'm sure people have had this with the ending of MASH or the ending of Cheers or these other shows that have been on for a long time. And then
TNG until Generations, which they started filming a week later.
Well, yes, that's true. And we knew that too. But it was a weird experience for me, because knowing that, these are people that every week I would sit down and have a new adventure with, and that wasn't going to happen anymore. And I think because they were filming Generations, it actually had to do two things that are almost diametrically opposed to each other. They had to end the show, but keep the story going. You couldn't just, it's not like in the end of Deep Space Nine, which is really an ending for most of the characters. They all go their separate ways, and that's the end of the show. Whereas in TNG, they don't go their separate ways. They're still on the Enterprise. They still have their next mission to go to. And I think it did an incredible job of doing both of those things really well, where you told a story that rounded out so much of what we had already seen over 7 years, but also ended in a way that you could have that next movie in 6 months or however long it was before that came out. So to me, it's the best example of a way to end a show or end a series by telling a good story. It makes Encounter at Farpoint, the pilot episode, so much better in my estimation because of the way it ties back to that. And then it does do these interesting ideas with some of the characters that's potentially set up things for, who knows, maybe some of it will pay off in this new Picard show that's coming out. We don't know. But it both being my first experience with taking the show away from me that I loved watching, and just how well it did at doing that, I think is worth mentioning. And that's why it's one of my favorite episodes.
I think it's interesting in that it's a great example of something that I've talked about on the show before, in that when you look at any particular episode of any show, and this isn't a Star Trek thing in particular, but it's all about set and setting, right? The things that are in you at the time and the universe around you as you experience it. And if you put yourself back into someone who was watching the show in, when did All Good Things go on the air? What, 93, 94?
93, I think, yeah.
Somewhere around there. You didn't know that you were about to see Q again. You didn't know that you were about to wrap the whole thing up with the courtroom scene with the red and black judge robes and all that again. And you didn't know what was going to happen in Generations. So you were in a very different place as you watched the show. And I think that that's something that is changed, I think, a little bit for fans who come to the show later, in that they, even if they've never watched Star Trek, they know that there are movies with Picard, right? I mean, you can't like get into Star Trek fandom even a little bit without knowing that there's a TV show and there's some movies from TOS and there's also some movies from TNG. And that informs how you're viewing those episodes. But we didn't have that when we were watching it in real time.
No, we didn't.
And so that's a moment that in a lot of ways cannot be recaptured, I feel. And then at times I attack myself and say, John, you're being elitist. But I do really think that there's something to be said for that, because we did not know what was going to be happening at the time. So I don't know. What was your take on it? As someone who actually watched it in original broadcast, I'm curious, because I did not. Maybe I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but I'm curious as to your take on it.
Yeah, I remember. So I know they did a promo, as they always did. And I think they revealed a few things, but I remember I found it very confusing, to be honest, as I was watching it. And it turned out to be one of those times when it's confusing, but in a good way at the end of the day, because it all makes sense eventually. But we open up and Picard's like, I'm moving back and forth through time. And then he starts jumping into the future and he's at the vineyard and then he goes back. You have no idea what's going on. And I remember feeling like I was spending a lot of times playing catch up with the show. And I think, to your point, that's something that you don't get when you know, well, nothing happens to these people because they made four movies with them afterwards. Yeah, I just remember playing catch up, and then when Q showed up saying, oh, okay. And then he's in the courtroom, which I still love the fact that they brought up the fact that, well, we never really ended that trial, and we're still dealing with what we set up in the first episode, which is, they didn't do that on purpose. I mean, the Q story wasn't even in the pilot originally. But to be able to go back and do that and have that complete arc in an era where there wasn't arc television being told in a way, it wasn't.
Let me just say one thing about that for the listeners who don't know the story, which was that Encounter at Farpoint was a single episode, a single 45-minute episode. And then the network had asked for a 2-hour premiere. And then Roddenberry went back and added in all the Q stuff to make it a double parter. And that's where Q came from, which was it was not something that was originally in the script. It was all edited in later by Roddenberry himself. So that's what Carl's alluding to. Just in case anybody didn't know, I just wanted to make that clear.
No, thanks for that. I kind of, shouldn't assume that people know all this stuff.
I like to always be safe. I'm a belt.
No. I appreciate that. But then, if I remember correctly, you said at one point, I think you might have even told me when we were in Vegas that you saw All Good Things way after that it had actually aired.
Yes.
So how did, if I can put you on the spot for a second, how did that color your viewing of the episode?
The nerve of you. This is not, you don't get to ask me questions. I ask you questions. That's how this works. But I will say, I kid. So at the risk of inciting the wrath of the fandom, let me just say a couple things. I had seen most of TNG, especially the early parts, especially the first few seasons, because I was in high school at the time, and I knew that I have absolute metaphysical certainty I was in front of the TV watching every episode as it aired on WPIX, Channel 11 Alive in New York City growing up. And then I went to college, and my life got a lot more complicated. And then at some point I entered the Navy, and I missed a lot of Star Trek at that time. So I had missed All Good Things, and I knew that I had missed this big finale. And I kind of never went back to watch it on purpose because I felt like I was saving it. And this is something that I'm having with my Voyager watch through right now. In fact, as we record this, just a few days ago, I was tweeting about this, that I've been slowing down in my Voyager watch through because it's the last bit of canonical Star Trek that I know I haven't seen. So I feel like I want to portion it out and save it. And so I haven't been watching as many episodes, even though I could, even though in some cases I had the time to watch it. I would rather go back and watch a TOS thing or a Star Trek movie or something, only because I wanted to save that little bit. Because if you haven't seen it, it's new to you, right? And so I felt like I wanted to save it. And I felt that way about All Good Things, that like this was a finale that got a lot of positive comments that I had not seen. And the problem is that I had seen many other finales in the interregnum between the early 90s and as we record this in 2019 that were so incredibly epic that it set an expectation which was impossible to fulfill. I mean, if you think about the finale of a show like 6 Feet Under, which I don't know if you'd seen, but it has all this pathos around this daughter and the feelings around it. I mean, and it was a show which was heavily scripted to come to this finale, the series finale of Babylon 5, which is a show that I have a lot of love for, which even if you've never seen it, I will say that the writer of the show did not want anyone to do any follow-ons. So he made a finale where you would not be able to do anything else with that show. He told the show he wanted to tell, and he's like, I am ending this doggone thing, and I am ending it in a way such that there can be nothing else. And if you do anything else, it's going to be bad and it's going to suck. So don't do it. And it really had all this feeling around it. And there's been so many other series finales that have happened in the intermediate time that I'm unable to put myself back into 1993 John to experience All Good Things.
Sure.
And so people would say, oh, you're in for a treat. You know, it's amazing. Oh, it's a wonderful. And I watched it and I was like, it's okay.
Yeah.
But to me, I would not put it even in my top, I don't know, let's think. 7 seasons of Star Trek TNG, 20-something episodes. I would not even put All Good Things in my top 25 or 30 of TNG episodes. Okay. And I mean, that's off the top of my head. I mean, I didn't really sit down and make a list, but it just was not that special. It was kind of, I mean, it was good. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't the amazing experience that I had prepared myself for when people had been telling me like, oh, it's, this thing. And I think it's part of that set and setting, right? Which is if I had been back in 1993 and had watched all of TNG and had seen that episode, I would probably have a very different reaction to it.
Yeah.
But as someone who was coming back to it in, I think it was 2017 or 2018 when I watched it, I think there's been too much marquee television in between.
Sure.
And I'm also older. And so I think that's also an effect. So I think that's changed how I watched it. And again, it's not a criticism of the show. It's not a criticism of the work that the writers did. It's just that I'm a different person than I was in 93. And if I had seen it back then, I would probably have a very different reaction to it today.
Yeah.
So that's probably where that came from. And that's a lot of throat clearing just to say that, it was a great episode, but it just wasn't the experience I'd hoped for.
Yeah. No, I had a similar experience recently. I have a friend of mine who I'm trying to get introduced into Star Trek a little bit more. And we were watching TNG. She hadn't seen most of it. And we get to the best of both worlds, and I'd set this up like, this is the best cliffhanger that television's ever done. And we went, and she's like, that's it? Like, okay. So again, to me, it was the first time I even was exposed to this concept of what a cliffhanger was. I'm like, what do you mean that's the end? I have to wait the whole summer to see the rest. And there's a funny story actually that again, to talk about kids today who get their TV online and it's all, you can just binge the whole thing and all this stuff. And back when TNG was on, it was syndicated, which was, the stations would buy it and show it whenever they felt like showing the episode. And, we were in the summer after All Good Things, and we were traveling to my grandmother's house, and we were going to get there on Friday. And that was the day that her local station showed Star Trek: The Next Generation. I was going to finally get to see part 2 of Best of Both Worlds. We get there, and they showed the show 1 week later than my show did, or my station did. So I get there and turn it on, and it's part 1.
Well, better that than preemptive strike.
Well, true. But then my dad hadn't set up the VCR to tape the episode because we expected to be able to watch it in my grandmother's house. So I don't remember how we solved this problem, but it took forever for me to actually see what had happened in the resolution of that story. Because, again, just the way syndication worked, and they could show the show whenever they felt like it. And, darn you. But
I think that's part of how we all consume Star Trek, right? Which is that as you watch the episodes, it really is a matter of the person that you are when you watch the episode, right? And I've talked about The Offspring from TNG numerous times. And I remember seeing that episode in original broadcast and just being like, yeah, that was pretty good. Okay, so I think I'm going to go out with my friends tonight, and I think we're going to do blah, 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 blah. And now I really can't put it on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really can't, unless like I'm in a certain mood and like things are in a certain way, because it affects me very differently because now I'm a parent, I'm married, and I'm in a whole different stage of my life. And I think that's okay. And so that's not in any way, and I really want to say I'm not in any way criticizing the episode or saying you shouldn't love it.
No.
I'm not, but it's just that I'm at a different stage in my life. And so the people that have fond memories of that episode, you have to separate the feeling that you have from when you originally watched it.
Mm-hmm.
From the feeling that you might have if you were to be introduced to it today. I'm reminded of my friend Bill Smith of the Trek Geeks. I was telling him, again, about the show that I love called Babylon 5 and how it was amazing. And he looked at it, he's like, the effects are terrible. And I'm like, well, yeah, they made it in the mid 90s on Amigas. But that,
right.
and he's like, well, but yeah, well, he's in his head, he's probably, thinking like, well, Star Trek Discovery's on. I mean, look at that. It's like, well, no, that's not, you have to calibrate your expectations. It's the 90s, but again, it's the things that are within you as you encounter it.
But would Bill criticize the special effects of the original series, though?
You'd have to ask him.
Yeah,
I think we should pose this question to him and see what he says, because that's one of the questions I always ask is, if you're watching a TOS episode, I'll ask you, Carl, if you're watching a TOS episode and you have your choice between the original broadcast version or the remasters from CBS with the newer fixed effects, which do you choose?
I usually go with the original because that's what I remembered, and sometimes they do an okay job or even a good job with the new effects, but so many times it just takes me out of the story because I'm like, that's not what it looked like. It's the same thing with when George Lucas went and monkeyed around with Star Wars and changed effects and things. And I was spending more time trying to find the different things rather than actually paying attention to what was on the show.
So let's go on a Star Wars rant for a minute. My main complaint about the revisionist Stalinist history of Star Wars is not that Lucas wants to change things, because there's one complaint that I completely buy, which is that the original film from the 70s was made to be shown in a theater, and you couldn't pause it or rewind it. And so there are effects that hold up if it's just a flash on the screen.
Mhm.
But in today's world with DVDs and, of course, streaming and Blu-rays and all that, the effects don't hold up if you can pause and rewind and watch it in 1080 as opposed to what you were watching on a screen at the time,
Mhm.
across the theater. And so I get fixing those things. What I don't understand is the major story elements that he changed. And
Right.
today, as we record this, the 1977 version
Yeah.
of Star Wars is not commercially available.
Right.
That is a groundbreaking piece of cinema, which for historical cinematic reasons is historically important and it
Mhm.
cannot be viewed.
Right.
That's wrong.
I agree.
That's completely wrong. Not because, well, that's not the version of the film I meant to make. Dude, that's the version of the film that made you who you are.
Right. Yeah.
You
It
would
gave you the money to make the changes later.
Yeah, we would not be
Yeah.
sitting here if you were not that guy who made that film. And so that film should be available. And you can disclaim it and say, this is like a historical oddity, or I ran out of money, or, you really shouldn't pay attention to it. But it's historically important. It should be available for those of us who care about such things.
Yeah.
That's my problem with it. So that was just a rant. I'm sorry you pressed the hidden rant button and I had to go on that.
That's twice now. I gotta watch that.
Yeah, it's very bad. It's very bad. I'm working on that. I'm trying to be a better person and I'm trying to figure that out. All right, let's move on and talk about some Deep Space Nine. We've got 3 of these to talk about. So I think I want to talk about them in order. Let's start by talking about Duet.
Okay.
A season 1 episode of Deep Space Nine, probably in a lot of people's rankings, maybe the best of season 1. Certainly not for everybody, but for a lot of people, I think it would be. We have the alleged war criminal Gul Darhe'el. We've got Eamon Maritza. We've got Kira Nerys on the warpath, thinking she's got a line on a major war criminal, and it turns out to be something quite different. Please tell me about this episode, Carl. What is it that attracted you to this particular episode?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can point to about this episode, from the performances of the main characters that are involved in it. But it's in a lot of ways, it's similar to The Wounded in that it's telling a story that is a lot more complicated than it initially feels like on the surface. We've been set up to believe Bajoran's good, Cardassian's bad. And even that's kind of how Kira approaches life at this point. And you have this case of a Cardassian who she believes is a war criminal. We can debate whether or not Eamon Maritza actually is a war criminal or not. But, he's initially claiming to be just a filing clerk. And then they find out, oh, this guy looks like the infamous Gul Darhe'el who did all these atrocities in this prison camp. And he starts ranting and raving and talking about all the horrible things he did. And then it turns out that he's really not Gul Darhe'el, but he is that filing clerk who's sacrificing himself for the betterment of the Cardassian people, because he believes, and I don't think he's wrong, that the only way the Cardassians can move out of that period of time is to admit all the terrible things they did and pay the consequences for it. So I think it's another example of, it's very easy to draw historical parallels between the Bajorans and Cardassians and what happened in the world for real. But to use, again, a science fiction futuristic setting to tell this story in a way that lets them explore that aspect of things a little bit more in a more accessible way than would be, again, if we were having a historical drama about certain events that happened in the world.
It's a very powerful episode with some incredible performances. And I think really the performances are what really brings it really to the fore. If you had actors who were really not on their game, it would not have been nearly as good.
No, I mean Harris Yulin, who plays Maritza, in that last scene when he goes from all high and mighty to basically whimpering in the corner in the span of what seems like 30 seconds. I can't imagine how I'm certainly not an actor. I don't know how you can go that emotional journey the way that he does and do it so well. My hat's off to him for that performance.
If you're an actor, it's the kind of scene that you live for, right? When you're doing actually something to do, right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to the scene where you walk in and you put the drinks down on the table and leave. This is a scene that has some real meat to it and some actual acting, right? Where you get to emote and actually have some pathos and some feeling, and really play with something substantial, as opposed to many other roles, which I'm sure actors get, which are sort of, workaday sort of things.
Right.
So, and I think that they all really brought it. For myself, I have a very different reaction to the episode. Not different isn't bad, but I'm always reminded of my own particular history and my own family being Armenian, and we have this genocide, and where it was never fully adjudicated. The Cardassians, I don't think, would deny what they did. We went to Bajor, we took over the planet, and we tried to help these people, is what they would say.
Right.
But they can't deny that they did it. Whereas in the historical case of the Ottoman Empire, present-day Turkey, they just say, well, World War I, there was a lot of stuff going on, dude.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of stuff going on. It was World War I. There was crazy things happening. So, like, whatever, whatevs, shruggy emoji. And to this day, they've denied that what they did was a genocide against their own people, their own citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that's always in my mind as I view the episode. And so that always colors my interpretation of it. Again, this is something I'm sure I beat to death on the podcast many times, which is, again, set and setting. And it's something I always think about as I watch the show. And but I think that makes it a richer meal, right? When we bring our own experiences to it, and we have our own points of view as we watch it. But would you put this in the top of Deep Space Nine or in the top of all Star Trek?
I would certainly put it in the top of Deep Space Nine. Depending on how many tops we're doing, it would probably make it in the top of Star Trek. It's certainly one of the essential episodes. If you were going to sit down and do a poor man's walkthrough of Deep Space Nine, like if you don't want to sit down and watch 7 seasons of 26 episodes, here are the highlights that you have to hit along the way. If you want to basically see the story of Deep Space Nine without watching every episode, this is still an essential episode to watch, I think.
And one of the amazing things is it's a season 1 episode.
Yeah.
How many season 1 episodes of Star Trek are terrible?
Well, of Deep Space Nine, most of them. I mean, I don't know about terrible, but it certainly suffers from season 1-itis, which a lot of the 90s Trek certainly deal with, where they're not quite sure what to do with characters. They're not quite sure what the setting is. They weren't even sure what Odo's face looked like for about half of that first season.
They're still figuring stuff out. Yeah. I mean, I would say that season 1 of TOS was incredibly strong, and in my opinion is the best of all season 1s of all Star Trek. I think Voyager season 1 was underrated, and I think could be right under TOS for that. I have to think more about that, but certainly season 1s of Trek have not been like the best seasons of Trek. And here we have a season 1 episode that I think just hits it out of the park.
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, then let's talk about a later episode that I think really is Deep Space Nine firing all cylinders, and that's past tense. So here we have sanctuary districts. We have our heroes going back in time. We've got Dax separated from Cisco. We've got the amazing Dick Miller, who's been recognized in so many different things that he's done over his life. We've got Frank Military playing BC, the bad guy. Just an amazing episode. But this one came up on the list, Carl. So tell me why we should talk about it.
So I have to admit that this came up on my list because of the news that we're watching lately. News about possible solutions to homelessness, which really was a big red flag to me. Like, I think I even tweeted that, hey, who wants to watch Past Tense tonight? When they made this announcement about moving certain people into various locations. I think it's a story that's sadly even more prescient now than it was when it aired in the 90s. And we're almost, 2024, I think is when this episode takes place. So we're almost there. And in a lot of ways, we're almost there in real life, too. I think
sadly, Carl, I will interrupt you to share this one brief story, which is that I live in Las Vegas, which I've made no secret about. In the northern part of our state, Reno, Nevada, and Carson City, they've been buying bus tickets for homeless people to San Francisco.
Oh, gosh.
And say if they round up homeless people, they just put them on a bus and send them to San Francisco, because San Francisco is very open and accepting and says, yep, you can come here. We'll do all these things and we have all these services. And Reno and Carson City, which are not very wealthy compared to the rest of the state, they're like, that is our solution. And so they were shipping people off to San Francisco, and that was the sanctuary district for Northern Nevada. So it's a real thing that really happened. It's not a joke.
Gosh. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think this is another example of Trek being a morality tale type show where we're going to set up this situation and we're going to talk about what's wrong with it essentially and why this is a bad idea and bring our enlightenment to the Federation society that we have and why this is better and how can we move forward from this terrible situation we find ourselves in. I do think that a lot of ways Trek tries to do the futurist stuff about here's how you get to this futuristic society. And a lot of people like to look at Trek in that way as an aspirational goal, I think, for the world. And I frankly, I disagree with that a little bit, just because I think they do a great job of showing like, this is a wonderful place to live. Wouldn't you want to be here? They never tell you how they get there. They always just kind of, even in an episode, which I love, like Past Tense, when they kind of philosophize about the reasons that sanctuary districts happen and how do we move forward and the Bell riots and how that impacts society moving forward. They still do a lot of hand waving and say, well, and then a lot of good things happen and then we get to our future. Or, we had World War III and then the Vulcans land and then magically everyone unites behind one cause all of a sudden. And then we get to this wonderful future that we have waiting for us. And I don't think they do a good job of actually showing how you get there. Like how is a society like the one we see in the Federation in the 24th century, how does that work? How does that even happen? How do you get to a society that has no needs, wants, no money? I mean, human nature to me doesn't lend itself well to that type of society, where I know a lot of people who would say, well, if I don't have to make any money anymore, I'm not working anymore. I'm just going to put my feet up and watch TV all day long.
I want to make a distinction that is important to me, and it may not be important to other people, but it is to me.
Yeah.
Which is that I think one of the lessons of Star Trek, and one of the things that I think you can take from it, is that humanity's best days are in front of us, not behind us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you necessarily have to buy into the view of the Federation as the shape of that society.
Okay.
Because in my mind, the Federation is a dystopia and is not a great place to live in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. It's terrible. It's a surveillance state. It really is soul crushing. I think in a lot of ways, I don't think it is a good place to live. And I would not choose to. I'd be one of those miners. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go establish my own planet to be away from y'all, because this is not a society where I want to live. But there is something to be said for the optimism broadly of Star Trek, which is to say that we're going to respect the full diversity of human lives and the full diversity of human wants. And to say that this is a universe where you can choose to live differently and to live in a way that you choose to live. And that's great. But to say that, well, it's going to be the Federation. We have to figure out how to get rid of money. We have to figure out replicators and transport. I forget all that. Just, to me, that was never, and maybe I'm out of step with the Trek fandom here, but in fact, I'm sure that's the case in a lot of cases, maybe not this one, but in a lot of cases. But to say that, we need to figure out these things to get to that so that we're on starships and doing this and that, I don't subscribe to that at all. But at the very basis of saying humanity's best days are in front of us, I'm for that. And that's enough for me. It's not enough to say that it's a very different story to say we have to have these things that Star Trek shows us, and that's the shape of the future. It's not future history like, oh, here's what we're going to get to, and here's how we're going to get there. It's more a story about great things are in store for humanity. To steal a phrase, the human adventure is just beginning.
Right.
And I'll sign on for that without necessarily worrying about the particular shape of that future, because I think it's folly to try to figure it out as we sit here.
I completely agree with everything that you just said, because it is, if you start to look at the Federation a little too closely, it becomes a little unsettling, if not a lot unsettling in a lot of ways. But I think, where Trek excels is when you then go back and you shine a light back on certain situations, either in our past, literally, or in their past, but in our future, and say, look at what's going on here. This is a bad situation that we're in. We need to, and here's how we could possibly get ourselves out of it. I mean, the solution that they propose at the end of Past Tense is a very, it's not a Star Trek solution. It's, let's make everyone go back to work again. And it seems very, very capitalist in a way, where we're going to give jobs to people, but it's not, it's not where you would expect it's not a future that would be predictive of the Federation, I don't think. But you even have you have Dick Miller at his most Dick Millerness, basically kind of being the face of that era, coming around and helping Sisko and Bashir and helping them basically escape history, so to speak, at the very end of the episode, where at the beginning he's just, the grumpy. I mean, he's the Dick Miller type, being grumpy and telling people to sit down and shut up, which is what Dick Miller was always good at.
Carl, I want to hit you with an alternative interpretation of the episode. And again, I just want to be clear. I say this as your interlocutor to give you something to respond to, which is that the lesson of the past tense episode is not a hopeful one. It's a negative one, in that humanity will never achieve those things, a positive future, because we didn't, in fact, earn it on our own. It's because some guy from the future came back and did a thing which doesn't actually exist in the timeline. So it wasn't because of the positive actions that the people in the moment took. It was because this guy from the future came back and solved it for us by dying at the right time to inspire a movement. How would you respond to that?
Well, I guess it would depend on how you view the timeline working, because I feel like before they went back in time by mistake, there was Gabriel Bell who did do some good things. It wasn't Ben Sisko. It was the Gabriel Bell that we then meet and accidentally have killed at some point in the show. So the future that we have now, the Federation future that we have now as a result of that episode, I agree. It's because, Sisko and Bashir, mostly Sisko, went back and did something. But he was basically correcting things or putting them back the way they were supposed to be. So he was inspired by the actions of somebody who really did live and did these things. And then he had to go back, and because he was there and blundered his way into a situation and got this guy killed, he had to go take his place. So it's not quite, I don't think it's quite fair to say then that somebody from the future went and solved these problems. I think he was there, he caused a bigger problem, and that he then had to get out of his own mess rather than get humanity out of the mess that they had created for themselves. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Well, I think it does. But I mean, I think this is part of the problems you get into when you get into these timey-wimey episodes, where you start trying to resolve these conflicts and you start trying to resolve all this nonsense about, well, did that person really exist, or was it always that way? Wasn't it always Sisko who goes back in time? And if it was always him, then that would mean that we didn't actually earn that future. It wasn't us. We didn't solve our way out of it. It was some guy from the future who came back with the cheat sheet and said, here's how you do it. And it makes it lesser in some way if you subscribe to that point of view. If you have this alternative point of view, which again, it's not clear, I think, in the episode. I think you can take it either way based on how you approach it. I don't think that the show is in a place to tell you this is the correct way it was. I think that it's open to interpretation. And one of those interpretations is quite negative in my opinion. But I will say that there's another timey-wimey episode where I think they sidestep all those problems, and that's Far Beyond the Stars. So here we've got Sisko. He gets a vision from the prophets, and all of a sudden he's Benny Russell. We have all of our favorite actors, and now they're without their makeup and all their normal Starfleet doodads, and we're back in, what is it, the 50s, I think? And they're living in sort of regular 1950s sort of era. We've got Benny Russell with his infamous, among fans, breakdown in the office. And it's just incredible. And it sidesteps all of that insanity about, was this real or was it not? In my opinion, I don't know. What's your take on it?
No, I think by having it be a vision rather than literally going back in time and living this experience, I think it does avoid these paradox problems or predestination problems of, was it always him meant to go back, or was it, did we actually change history? Now we're living in an alternate timeline from what we expected to be living in. I mean, I picked this episode, but mostly because I think it's one of the most important and best episodes Star Trek has ever done. It never fails to affect me when I watch it. That last scene that Avery Brooks performs is amazing. The fact that he directed the episode on top of being in pretty much every scene in the episode is astonishing to me. To have that amount of stamina to direct an episode, but also put in that type of performance that he does. was incredible. And it has a lot of important things to say about individual rights, and it has a lot to say about prejudice and denying certain rights to certain individuals because of skin color, or even, there's a bit of a sexist conversation in there where, Nana visitors asked to stay home during the photo because the world's not ready to learn that one of the authors of this magazine is a woman. Same thing with Benny, because he's African American. He can't be in the photo either. So we have to pretend that he's not who he is. One of the aspects of the show that I really like is the fact that they picked Armin Shimmerman to be basically almost like the communist voice of reason kind of character, who's basically the antithesis of Quark. I thought that was a really clever decision to make him the most progressive of all of the people in there. And it's just another episode that I will never tire of watching. I don't think I'll ever get to the point where it doesn't get to me when the ending happens.
As we record this, the episode originally aired approximately 21 years ago, if I've done my math right. I would posit that this is an episode that could not have been made today in 2019. Mm-hmm. This script would have been thrown in the bin, and the writer would have been told, scrap it and do something else. Do you agree or disagree?
I would agree to a point. And I watched this the other day, and I tweeted that I still can't believe they put the N-word in a Star Trek episode. Just that alone would not fly today. I wonder what people would, if they tried to show this episode or tried to film this episode today, I wonder what the reaction would be. Would people see it for what it was back 20 some odd years ago? Or would it come off as, I don't know, would it come off as being in a negative way? I don't know what people would think of it if it was a new episode of television today. The fact that television itself has changed too, I don't think lends itself well to this type of storytelling where we're going to hit pause on our big story and do this almost like a very special episode in a way where there's a message here and there's a very important message here, but it's not driving the plot, other than maybe dealing with Sisko's hesitancy around staying on the station. But it's not, every episode these days, it seems, has to propel the plot, and it's the plot at all costs. And this is not a plot episode.
Every episode today seems to be like you're not allowed to take a breath.
Right. Which we can get to in a little bit, but
yeah, you have to go on to the next thing at warp 9, and be buckled into your seatbelt. And if you're not able to keep up, just restart the episode and rewatch it again.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I've always asked this of anyone who brings up this episode on the show. Mm-hmm. What is your point of view at the end of the episode where Sisko looks in the glass and he sees himself as Benny Russell in the glass? Is that an affirmation? Is that a denial of the historicity of the show? Or is that an affirmation that he is Benny Russell and the prophets really put him back in time? Or there's multiple interpretations of this. And I'm always curious as to what people think, because they don't talk a lot about it. They just see him look. And because it's a third person camera, you're not seeing from his point of view. It's an omniscient camera. So you're seeing actually the Benny Russell reflected in the mirror. Mm-hmm. What is your interpretation of that?
So I've always seen it as demonstrating that Benny Russell is a component of Sisko, or part of his psyche in a way. And because I don't think that the prophets sent him back in time, because the prophets have no concept of what that would mean. You exist here, you exist, time is to them is everywhere. I think they're bringing out an aspect of his personality or of his psyche and showing it in a way that would actually be impactful to him, because what they're trying to convince him to stay on the station is what I think their role is, because they appear to him in the guise of his father as this priest and saying you have to walk the path and you have to suffer, but at the end of the day you'll move forward on this path that we have you set on. And they could just talk to him like they have done sometimes, where he's in the weird, like, overexposed parts of they overexpose all the lights and everything, and then they talk to him in these cryptic ways. But I think that they were trying to find another means to get through to him. And this comes up again in the episode later when he finds himself in the asylum, when he's writing on the walls and everything. So this gets brought up again by the prophets in a way.
It's just another example, though, because we have that wonderful scene with Spock, which is very much the same, that he's in the room and he's writing his thoughts down. And it was just a nice callback. And I don't know if it was intentional, but I really liked that you had this nice callback to this episode. Whether it was intentional or not, I thought it was just really sweet.
I tend to think it was more, I mean, it's something we've seen before where they, the crazy person writes on the walls or writes on the floor. So I doubt that they were intentionally trying to tie them together, but I like that kind of through line that those two things make.
Carl, you seem to really have an interest in these weird sort of mind-bendy kind of episodes, because one of the other ones that has come up is Deadlock, where we have Samantha Wildman. She's preggers. The Vidians are out there and they're trying to harvest body parts. And we meet alternative Janeway and the alternative Voyager. And we have this very strange episode, which I think a lot of people really love and is certainly popularly considered to be among the best of Voyager. Why is this episode on the list? Is this something that really touches you, or are you just a big fan of it for the reasons that everybody else is? What's going on? Tell me.
I wouldn't say it touches me particularly, but I find it to be one of, especially in the early seasons of Voyager, one of the best episodes. And I think that the reason that I like it so much is that they take the obvious solution and turn it on its head, where you have one ship that's heavily damaged. You have one ship the duplicate ship, which is fine. And the obvious answer is we get rid of the damaged ship and we move on with the good one. But that story doesn't get to happen that way because of the Vidians showing up and boarding the good ship. And then they go off. They end up keeping the damaged ship and bring the alternate baby over and alternate Harry Kim, because Harry Kim dies as he's wont to do in Voyager. And it's just, I remember the first time I watched it, that solution just kind of came, it caught me off guard and I wasn't expecting it. I also think it illustrates one of the problems I have with Voyager as a whole, in that they recover from this situation way too quickly by, I think they mentioned it a couple times, but the fact that they're talking about, the nacelles are both fused and we don't have any antimatter and, all these hull breaches and all this stuff. And then by 3 episodes later, I think they're probably back up and running. And Voyager, and I think you've talked about this before, does a lot of, they don't stick to their principles too much as far as the scarcity of resources and the potential for conflict between the two crews that they put together and all that. But as a standalone episode, I think it works really well. And again, the premise is practically old hat by the time we get to it, because we've seen duplicates and that sort of thing before in Star Trek. But I don't think we ever saw that type of solution before, where it's not the good environment that we get to keep. We have to move on with the not so good environment. And I just wish they'd played that out longer.
I note that this episode has a mirror. We were talking about Far Beyond the Stars and the mirror in Discovery, of the same scene where characters writing on the walls. Here we have the same scene where the invading aliens walk onto the bridge while the self-destruct counts down to 0. So this is exactly the same as Star Trek 3, right? The computer is counting down. What? Let me hear. And it's exactly the same scene. So I think you have a particular penchant for these aliens getting caught in self-destructing starships, Carl. I think we've figured out what your fandom is all about. You like the double reverse switcheroo with the self-destruct option engaged. I think we've learned something here today.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense to me, I guess.
One of the incredible things about the episode to me is that you have these Vidians who are invading, and the whole idea of what they're about, it's really interesting. And I always appreciate when they have villains who are not necessarily villainous.
Right.
They're not these mustache twirling bad guys who are just out to, destroy stuff. They actually have a point of view.
No, I mean, I think in this episode, they are kind of more the generic bad guys. They just attack the ship and board it and start harvesting organs from people. But I think they've been set up previously to be somewhat sympathetic in a way. People knock the Neelix's lungs episode, but I think that there are some good scenes in there when the Vidians show up and explain why they're doing what they're doing in this situation that they find themselves in, and how their entire society basically has collapsed because of this disease. And they've basically had to refocus all of their energy on trying to stay alive. There's also that wonderful, I think it's a wonderful episode with the woman
Life Signs.
Life Signs, yes, with the holographic version of herself that the doctor falls in love with. Those are the episodes that I always appreciate, when they take these villainous types and flesh them out and make them a little more three-dimensional in it. And I think that's also kind of where I go with a lot of these episodes, is that they're taking a deeper take on these stories than you sometimes see.
I would put Life Signs in the top 10 of all Voyager for sure. And, maybe for me, because of some things we'll get into in another episode at another point with some other guests, but it's certainly an episode that matters a lot to me personally. So I think it's a tremendous episode. And I always love, and this is my own little devilish sort of sneakiness, I always like to talk about the Vidians whenever the topic of Tuvix comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Because my point of view is, well, if you can kill one person to save two, well, then the Vidians are heroes. Because they're saving lots of people by every person they kill. They're saving multiple Vidians, right? So they're awesome, which is what, in my opinion, I enjoy it when Star Trek can give us those examples of scenarios that challenge our beliefs.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And get us to think deeply about what is important here, right? So not that it's the source of all truth and knowledge, but it can be a really helpful yardstick in analyzing what is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I like it for that point of view. And thinking about a point of view that is quite different, one of the episodes that I really appreciated from season 2 of Discovery was New Eden. And I feel like we have to recap it a little bit more thoroughly, because one of the problems with Discovery in general is that the episodes run together and the episode titles don't matter all that much. So it's hard to say, oh, the one with the planet, right? Or the one where this thing happens, because it's sort of one big story. But this is the particular one where Pike and Burnham and Owasekun, if I said that name right, go down to this planet where they've been getting these Red Angel signals. And there's this society that's living there. And it turns out that the Red Angel brought them there. And there's sort of this church with these stained glass windows. And there's the Jacob character. So that's this particular one. I love it when people pick a newer episode. It seems like on Trek Profiles, people tend to pick a lot of the classics, which is okay. But I'm really excited to talk about something new. So tell me why this particular one is on the list, Carl.
So I think that this is probably the episode is the one that's in vein with the classic Star Trek story, where we run across this planet that has, set up, in this case, they set up an alternative religion that basically has cobbled together all these religious texts from Earth. And we have this landing party, and they're kind of trying to get a sense for who these people are and what their motives are. And the idea of this Jacob character, who's a descendant of scientists, and he's been waiting for confirmation that Earth is still out there, because they were transported to this planet during World War III. They have no idea if Earth is still around. He tends to believe that there is an Earth still out there, and he's just desperate to get confirmation and to hear that his planet is still around, and that humans are still traveling or out there. I guess they wouldn't be traveling the galaxy, but are still out there. And he makes some morally questionable choices by locking them up and stealing their things and everything, but he's doing it out of this personal need for vindication, and to be basically not vindication, but this personal need to have it confirmed for him that these people are from Earth, and that they are traveling the stars, and that they really are. It just feels like such classic Trek to me. And I remember watching and said, oh, this feels familiar, but it's still new, but it still felt like something I was used to with Star Trek. And they kind of move away from this, but I like Captain Pike's approach. He's fairly religious in this episode. He even quotes back the famous, someone says, peace be with you. And he says, and also with you. So I guess they changed the text back at some point between now and the future, but I'm still not used to that. As somebody who grew up going to church and going to Catholic youth group stuff and everything, when they changed the text of the Mass, it still throws me. But anyway, that's an aside.
Well, I just want to say, I think they were actually going to have Pike be an actual Christian devotee.
Yes.
In the episode, and then they changed it at the last minute to pull back from that a little bit.
I think that's true. Somebody asked Anson Mount about that at STLV, and he didn't really want to engage because he said it doesn't really matter what they wanted. What's important is what ended up on the screen, and that's what I want to talk about, not previous iterations of the character. And it was a classic, almost a Spock versus Kirk and or McCoy when, they get down to the planet and they're telling all these religious, the angel came and took the church and everything. And then Burnham's first reaction is, well, why don't you give me your real explanation for what happened? Like she's playing the Spock part by saying, well, my religion is science, so give me a scientific explanation for how you ended up on this planet. It can't be because a deity or an angel did this. And that's a very classic Trek thing where you have the faith versus scientific proof argument. And usually it ends up kind of being a combination of both at the end of the day. But I think you raised a point earlier about Discovery or current storytelling and how it moves at warp 9 and you go from point A to point B to point C really quickly. And I think this, for all the positive things I have to say about this episode, I think this is also a good example of that becoming an issue where you then have all this stuff going on the ship with the rings are going to fall into the planet and we have to do this, throw the asteroid out and capture them all and fling them away. And it's an interesting and exciting kind of premise, and they do some cool shots in there. But I think I would have preferred them focusing more on these people down on the planet and learn a little bit more about their society and what that involves in having our characters interact with them a little bit more than falling into the trap of, well, we have to have an action beat here because we haven't had one yet in this episode, and we all have to have action in all of our shows. So I don't know how you felt about that, but I didn't mind it so much. I just kind of wish they had emphasized other parts of the story more than they did.
This is an episode where I regret knowing more about the episode than I feel like I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you know that Pike is a religious guy
mm-hmm.
and an actual practicing religious person in the Christian tradition,
mm-hmm.
it makes his accepting of his fate later on in the show even more powerful because it mirrors a Christ-like story.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this idea that, well, this horrible fate is going to befall you and you don't have to do it, but you can if you want,
mm-hmm.
And he's like, yep, I accept it. To me, it would have added so much more pathos to that moment in the story. And I get that maybe they didn't want to get into that and there could be other reasons they chose not to do it. But knowing that they were right on the precipice of having it be that way, I just kept thinking that for me, I really would have felt like it would have punched up that moment later on when he accepts his fate to a whole nother dimension than what we got. So that bugged me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not able to watch the episode knowing what I know about it and responding to, because every time I look at it, I was like, oh man, it would have been so much cooler if,
right.
And it's not just fangasming because they actually were going to do that. And then they're
mm-hmm.
like, no, we're not doing that. Oh, okay. And it's one thing for the actor to say, well, just focus what's on screen. Yeah, but I can't unknow what I know.
Sure. Yeah.
So it doesn't work that way. So I agree with you that it was probably the most classic Trek, quote unquote, that we
mm-hmm.
got in Discovery. This whole idea about going down to the planet and there's all these things that happen down there. I feel like in season 3, we might get more of that because they extricated themselves entirely
mm-hmm.
from the goings on in the, what is it? Is it actually 22nd century in Discovery or is it 23rd? I'm not actually sure.
I think it's 23rd.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they've extricated themselves from that whole scenario. So now they're in a very different environment. So I hope they can take a breath and maybe, as my guest, Jen Tift said, find an anomaly or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a futile hope, but maybe they can do something a little bit different and have a little bit more leisurely storytelling. I don't know. I'm eager to see what they do.
I hope so. I hope we get something like that. They basically have a blank slate now. They can do anything they want. So it would be nice to kind of, my biggest wish for season 3 of Discovery is that these characters have a little more fun and not get put through the emotional ringer quite to the extent that they have been in the past two seasons. Everyone has this incredible journey and all these big things happen to them, but nobody seems to be that happy that any of it happened. So everyone's always either staring in shock or crying at some point. So I would like to see some smiles happening on Discovery.
Fair enough. So, Carl, we've talked about the fact that you're very active on Twitter, and people should follow you. You're a great follow on Twitter, especially if you have an interest in cinematic music or just talking Trek in general. You've been on not just Trek Profiles, but you've been on several other Star Trek podcasts. We've talked about the fact that you go to conventions. You're spending your hard-earned quatloos on Star Trek books. Why does Star Trek even matter to you, man?
I think it's a combination of, it's a franchise that tells good stories. They have characters that you can relate to, and at least one character you can relate to. And I think it would be hard to find somebody out there and have them watch a show and not find something in common with one of the characters on the show somehow. I think there's enough diversity among the different crews and the different shows that there's something in there, I think, for anybody. And I think that it's a show that it's entertaining, but it's also telling you something and it's causing you to think. And not every show does that. And not every show needs to do that. But I think that having a show that you get rewarded by engaging with it as a viewer, rather than just kind of passively sitting and soaking it all in. I think if you start thinking about some of the ideas that are being thrown out there, then you're going to get more out of the show. And I think that that's not unique, but it's also rare in a lot of television where you get a show that is going to stimulate that kind of conversation, even with yourself or with the people you're watching the show with or anything like that. And it's a show that's always been there in my life as far as I can tell and I can remember. I mean, obviously it hasn't been when I was very young, but for as long as I can actually remember watching entertainment, it's been a part of my life. And now with all these new shows, it looks like it's going to continue to have new shows. And now I feel like I'm almost back in that day of the next generation when the next show is going to be something new and I don't know what's going to come next. And it hasn't felt like that in a while because, the shows haven't been being made for a while.
Carl, I've enjoyed talking with you, but I have to tell you that the M5 is furiously signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh boy.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by my friend, the M5 Multitronic Unit. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, Carl?
Let's do it.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Carl's responses.
Systems ready.
Question 1. Which is more fun, firing phasers or firing photon torpedoes?
Oh, photon torpedoes.
Question 2. There's a full slate of activities in the rec hall tonight, Starfleet man. Should you go to Picard playing the Resican flute or Spock playing the Vulcan harp?
Vulcan harp.
You are now in Star Trek Hell. Will it be Threshold or Catspaw playing on Infinite Repeat?
Threshold.
It's a slow night in Voyager's mess hall. Caddis Cot with Naomi Wildman, subunit of Ensign Samantha Wildman, or Calto with Tuvok?
Calto.
Hit the Star Trek jukebox, Carl. Only 2 choices. Will it be Michael Giacchino or James Horner?
James Horner.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
Well, Carl, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has determined that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, my man.
Oh, thank you. That was tough.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Carl Wonders is awarded the title of Visiting Professor of Cinematic Musicology at the Aldebaran Music Academy.
So there you go.
Fantastic.
Carl, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation.
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is through Twitter. My handle is @listeningtofilm, and I'm poking around there and happy to talk Trek, music, or pretty much anything.
Thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles, Carl.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your burning hot Star Trek feedback, your Star Trek sick burns, or your sizzling lip sync sing-alongs to Faith of the Heart to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be fed to a giant space amoeba as a snack. This time, I leave you with a quote from the episode New Eden, when Captain Christopher Pike said, quote, "Be bold, be brave, be courageous. Black alert." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
I looked at the list. I think we're going to start with Devil in the Dark, actually.
Okay.
If that's all right with you. And I think we might do them actually in rough order.
Okay.
So we'll start with the TOS episode, do TOS movies, then we'll move on to TNG, and then DS9, then the Voyager, then the Discovery. I think that's probably the order we'll do it, unless you feel strongly about.
I realized in rewatching them that I think the Discovery and the Voyager ones kind of lend themselves well because they, to me, reflect both the potential and the annoyances of both of those programs for me. So they kind of thematically they'll go together.
Okay.
And then the DS9 ones really are sort of semi-inspired by your conversation with Jen about, Star Trek as futurism versus morality plays and things like that.
Oh God! As when I was listening to that, I was so disappointed with how I engaged with her on that. I could have done a much better job. But
I thought it was great. So,
well, we're our own worst critics.
Yeah. I probably won't even listen to this because I hate hearing myself. So I don't know how you do it, but get used to it, maybe. I don't know.
This is going to sound horribly self-indulgent and crazy, but I listened to this thing how many times, right? Because I'm editing it literally word for word. I'm going through and cutting out little bits here and there, and so I listen to it that way. Then I produce it as an MP3, and then I listen to that MP3 as a quality assurance check. And sometimes I have to go back and redo things, so then I have to listen again. And then I finally master the whole thing and actually, put in the art and labels and, all the other final steps. And then it's done, right? It's out. But then when it shows up in my podcast player, I feel like I always want to listen to it again. To make sure nothing weird happened.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know why. I've never found anything, but you never know. Or maybe I'm just secretly vain somehow. I haven't figured that out yet. So we'll leave that for something for me to talk about at some future point if I ever end up in therapy. Okay.
Because my mom was my mom and would...
Hold on right there.
Oh.
There it is.
There you go.
I had it right here on my desk. I just pulled it out.
I can't get it. That's fantastic.
But I realize I'm being incredibly rude, totally derailing you. But I also got this thing I bought at a convention.
Oh, yes.
The Starfleet officer requirements. Yeah, we also got, I think, what is this? The uniform manual, the Star Trek Starfleet uniform guide.
Okay. Yep. That's another Shane Johnson one, I think.
Yes. Yep. And then there's this one, which is one of my favorites here. Ships of the Starfleet.
Oh, I don't have that one.
So this one is really good. It's really just technical drawings of various kinds of ships, and I love it. Anyway, I'm sorry to derail you, but I happen to have that right here. Oh, wait a minute. I have one thing of interest. One of my most treasured Star Trek possessions.
Oh, that's great.
This was Patrick Stewart doing his one-man show of A Christmas Carol in, I think, 89 or 90. No, it was 91.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. It was definitely in the middle of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, you just suddenly opened up a can of worms there. Oh, sorry about that. That's all right. And strangely enough, I happen to be moving some things around in this room that I'm in. And so all this Star Trek stuff, which was in boxes, suddenly just came out. So
now here I name one of my more esoteric books and you just have it on top of there.
I need the Mr. Scott's Guide. I need it near ready fingertip access at all times.
There's some really interesting phrases in that book about something going on in the ship that doesn't, is that really what happened? So, but I don't know. The Canaanites might come out and complain about that book, but
absolutely. There's a nice little origin story for the 1701-A at the back, which
renamed a ship.
Yes. So for those who had not read it, the whole point was, if you've seen Star Trek 4, which I assume most of you have, and if you haven't, what's wrong with you? Stop this recording, go and watch it, and then come back. We'll wait. It's a podcast. It's okay. But you think, how did they get a new Enterprise so fast, right? Well, the idea was they'd already had the ship, and it had a different name, And at the last minute, when everything had happened with Jim Kirk, they decided just to rename it because they already had the ship they were ready to launch, and they just scrubbed the name, put a new paint job on, and slapped a sticker on the side, and off you go.
Yeah.
Which nothing wrong with that, it happens. Yeah.
Back in the day when it was the odd numbers are the bad movies and the even numbers are the good movies, which is a load of, you know what.
Well, the people at home can't see me, but I'm giving the big thumbs down. I do not subscribe at all to this idea that the odd movies are bad, because Star Trek 3 is the one I'll always bring up. And by the way, I will also fight off anyone who tells me TMP is a bad movie. So I will defend that movie against all comers. I'll take you all together, all apart. I don't care.
Not to derail the Star Trek 3 conversation. Did you get to see TMP in the theater?
I did not, only because I was actually on a work trip that overlaid the dates exactly. So I was on a plane or in a strange city, and I had work commitments that I could not get out of. So I desperately wanted to go see TMP in theaters, but it just was not possible because I had a work trip that was that Sunday to Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And that Sunday and Wednesday is when the events were showing. Right. There was just no way I could get out of it.
Okay. I was just curious. I didn't want to derail, but
we often get derailed on Trek Profiles.
That's okay.
That's how we roll up in here, my man. It's okay. I didn't research this ahead of time, but as we're sitting here talking about this, is that the origin of the famous Picard clap meme?
Picard clap meme.
Where he's sitting and he listens to Gulmasset's story, and then he turns around and he claps, and he's like,
"No, I don't think so."
Or am I remembering that wrong? I could be. I didn't research it, but it seems like he's just listening to him. It seemed like that could have been the moment, but I could be wrong.
No, I don't think that's it.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm eating these almonds. And one of them just suddenly dried me out. And my La Croix peach pear is empty, and so so I'm SOL. That's okay, but I have a little bit of this left. So okay, where was I? Boom tiggity, we're done.
All right,
is that all right for you, man?
I'm glad I only had one of these. It's an endurance test here.
Oh, sorry, man.
And my pick of threshold is simply so that I enjoy watching that one. So if I'm in hell, I might as well watch something that's not too bad. But
well, it's not a matter of your particular choices, but there are people out there who are like, nope, that's the worst of all Trek. I was like, okay,
I'll defend that one.
Yeah. Well, then what is the worst of all Trek?
Code of Honor.
Okay. That's a fair choice. I go for that. I got to say, I had no recollection of that episode when I rewatched it.
And then you watch it and you're like, oh no.
But the thing was, like, I remembered that was like one of the second or third or fourth episode. And I have absolute metaphysical certainty that I was watching that in original broadcast.
Yeah.
In high school. And I rewatched it when Mission Log was doing the episodes. So when they were into TNG, I was rewatching along with them at the time. Mm-hmm. And I remembered watching that episode, and I was like, I don't remember this at all. I don't know what is happening right now. It was just so bizarre.
I can't remember if it's Dan or Bill who said that if you actually just turn the picture off and listen to the script, it's not terrible. Because
that was so much log.
Is it okay? Because so much of what is bad is just the cultural stuff.
Yeah. If you read the words on the page, they're not terrible.
Right.
But if you watch it and their whole idea about it was just awful. It was awful.